Two black psychiatrists tell it as it is, in the first book to reveal the full dimensions of the inner conflicts and the desperation of the black man's life in America. William H. Grier and Price M. Cobbs. Foreword by U.S. Senator Fred R. Harris. William H. Grier, Price M. Cobbs. To our intrepid black brothers. Keep on keeping on. When my colleagues and I on the National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders concluded that the deepest cause of the recent riots in our cities was white racism, we went as directly as we knew how to the heart of the matter. To be sure, there are many evils which derive from racism that are more easily identified, including the existence of ghetto neighborhoods, joblessness, stultifying classrooms, and poor health. But there should be no mistake about this, for the future of America is too important. The root cause of the black wrath that now threatens to destroy this nation is the unwillingness of white Americans to accept Negroes as fellow human beings. This is precisely what we meant by racism. This book is crucially important because it, too, goes to the heart of the matter. I can only hope its message is heeded. That message is simple: that despite the passage of VE civil rights bills since 195-7, despite the erosion of legal supports for segregated institutions, despite greater acceptance of Negroes into our major institutions, both public and private, it is still no easy thing to be a black person in America. As the authors put it, this is to say that for the average Negro so much time has passed and so little has changed. What does this mean? The answer is clear, yet terribly difficult for most of us to see. The civilization that tolerated slavery dropped its slave-holding cloak, but the inner feelings remained. The practice of slavery stopped over 100 years ago, but the minds of our citizens have never been freed. The authors as psychiatrists are admirably equipped to see that white perceptions of Negroes, and the historical themselves, are at the of our present troubles. They demonstrate beyond challenge the crippling effects of white American culture on the attempts of Negro Americans to do here what all people everywhere must do if they are to develop fully to an identity, a sense of worth, to relate to others, to love, to work, and to create. Black rage is the result of our failure, after 300 years, to make these human values possible. Many of the cases that the authors discuss will no doubt fascinate you as they fascinate me. They are in most cases ordinary people doing or attempting to do ordinary things, but handicapped by one thing above all else, that they are black people in a white man's culture. These cases, the authors argue, reveal much, as earlier discussions of mental disorders always have, about the society in which they occur. That the message is unpleasant goes without saying. It reveals in 1,000 subtle ways the shortcomings of this land in its struggle to realize its central values: individual freedom and equality. Without question the hour is late and the message of this book is grim. But the restoration of domestic tranquility to this land depends on our understanding and heeding it. What the hell do niggers want anyway? Every other ethnic group has made it up the ladder on its own. Why don't the blacks do likewise? They keep raving about their rights. Well, white people have rights too. These and similar comments have been the voice of white America lashing back at the growing unrest of Negroes. Black people continue to revolt against laws and customs that are deadly and humiliating. The voice of Black America has been heard in the explosions of Watts, Newark, and Detroit. Aggression leaps from wounds iced and ambitions spiked. It grows out of oppression and capricious cruelty. 3. It is logical and predictable if we know the soil from which it comes. People bear all they can and, if required, bear even more. But if they are black in present-day America, they have been asked to shoulder too much. They have had all they can stand. They will be harried no more. Turning. The growing anger of Negroes is frightening to white America. There is a feeling of betrayal and undeserved attack. White people have responded with a rage of their own. As the lines become more RMLY drawn, exchange of information is the RST casualty. If racist hostility is to subside, and if we are to avoid open con-ICT on a nationwide scale, information is the most desperately needed commodity of our time. And of the things that need knowing, None is more important than that all blacks are angry. White Americans seem not to recognize it. They seem to think that all the trouble is caused by only a few extremism. They ought to know better. We have talked to many Negroes under the most intimate of circumstances and we know better. By way of introduction we would have the reader meet 3 black people who are not in open rebellion against anyone. They are simply trying to live out their lives in as full a way as circumstances will allow. They are typical of black Americans, held tight in a snare, coming more and more to realize that even their inner suffering is due largely to a hostile white majority and, with this realization, gaining a determination to change that hostile society. Roy was a painter. On the job, he worked on the highest scaffolds that were hung up around buildings. He worked desperately hard, saved his money, and looked forward to a career as a professional golfer. In a trade in which speed and skill paid off, he was a good painter and made a handsome living. One Friday afternoon he slipped and fell 30 feet to the ground. He landed in soft sand inches from 21 stake which might have impaled him. He was afraid that his injuries might be permanent, but aside from a few aches he was found well enough by the doctor. At the dispensary, he was sent home and was told to check later with his family doctor. Driving home, he felt a sharp pain in his groin which lasted through the night. The next day a back pain sent him to the hospital. Prior to the accident he had been in excellent health and a rapid recovery was expected. His body was a well-functioning machine. He exercised regularly and maintained robust health. He looked forward to the time when he could give up hard labor and devote full time to the more glamorous life of a golf professional. When discharged from the hospital he was told that everything was functioning as it should and that he could return to work. And he would have, except for his worry about a symptom to which little attention had been paid. Outside the hospital the problem became all-consuming, he was unable to have an erection. His physicians found no organic basis for the calm. 5. Plaint. There had been no nerve damage to his spine and no injury to his genital organs. After repeated tests which offered no explanation, they recommended that he see a psychiatrist. He was skeptical of this advice and recited the story of his fall to the psychiatrist. He told of having been was a gambler and small-time con artist who did not support the family and only visited them from time to time. Roy remembered him as a cruel man who beat him viciously on the occasion of each visit. His mother was a hard-working, resourceful woman who supported her children by doing domestic work for white families. She too was cruel. She beat the children regularly and Roy recalls how difficult it was to be friendly with her. In a moment of tenderness she would sometimes strike him, remembering some misdemeanor which had escaped punishment. Life was squalid and humiliating and Roy left soon after graduating from high school. He was ambitious. He exercised with weights and played golf daily, having learned the game in the South as a caddy. As we noted earlier, he worked long hours and saved his money. He always volunteered for the most hazardous jobs and on most jobs worked near the top of the building. He felt that the only way to get out of the ghetto was to work hard. He exhausted himself on the job. He went to Alaska, where the pay was higher, giving no thought to the greater danger in the more hazardous work there. He was black and he felt that superhuman efforts were required to make it. He was a driven man. He had been married for about a year before he fell, and his sexual life, like his work, was vigorous. He had intercourse 2, 3, and 4 times nightly. His wife, whose previous husband had failed to satisfy her sexually, was delighted with his performance and felt that their marriage was largely founded on his prodigious capacimes. For years Roy had carried within him the fear that he would not make it and would have to return to the small town of his birth as a failure. After the accident he had dreams of falling from a building and shattering on impact as though made of glass. He had seen himself as a lone wolf, working hard, facing barriers, overcoming them, and moving up. Hard work would pay off. In this attitude he recognized some characteristics of his mother and stated adly that he had no wish to be like his father. With the fall his world crumbled. He could not work, he became afraid of heights. He asked his wife for reassurance, and made so much of his impotence that she left him. He was anxious, unable to sleep, and he was reduced nearly to receiving public assistance. He brooded over his impotence and considered suicide. His unraveling after the accident emphasized the fragility of his previous functioning. One might speculate at great length about his castration anxiety and counterphobic functioning at work. But he was concerned about failing even before the fall. He seemed primed for a dissolution of his comfortable world and a return to the South. He seemed to feel that he had no right to do well. He said nearly that, coming as he did from the squalor of the black ghetto, he had done well to stay up as long. 7. As he had. He expected to end up crushed, down and out. It was as if the proper place in life for him was as an ineffectual, defenseless, castrated man, and that his brief period of competence was but a temporary violation of the natural order of things. Roy's illness revolved in large measure around. That led to his fall and subsequent symptomatology were encompassed within a larger social dynamic which was in motion before his birth. For 300 years his place in America had been shaped by powerful forces, and the small drama of his own life becomes magna ed in the shaping of a nation and multiplied by his 20 million brethren. Bertha was born in the South, the baby daughter of an unusual Negro farm family. They were landowners and her father was a man of pride and courage who had survived. She recalled an example of his strength from her childhood. A white man once spoke insultingly to her mother and says rare. Her father, an older man, beat the white man senseless. By some means or other he managed to avoid the reprisals, legal and otherwise, of the white community. Bertha was a dark girl with thick lips and a nose. When she was sent to a nearby city to school, she lived with relatives who considered her homely and unsophisticated. She was a spirited child, however, and reminded them that she was receiving excellent grades while her attractive city cousins were barely passing. She was in fact very bright and graduated from a mediocre college with high marks. As a young woman she moved from the South to a large city and sought employment as a schoolteacher. She was told that the college she had attended was too poor academically for her to qualify and it would be necessary for her to take additional courses. This she did, working in a menial job part-time and going to school. She was busy climbing over an unnecessary series of hurdles and it was sine qua that she selected this time to enter upon a miserable marriage. The man she chose was an uneducated laborer, who was bitter and envious of her education. He was physically abusive and degrading in his sexual approach. After 1 week of marriage she realized it was a mistake. She later spent considerable time pondering why she had made this marriage, but found it difficult to recall her frame of mind at the time. She could nor remember any thought of her childhood which might offer a clue. She had always envisioned herself as a professional woman married to a professional man. Her view of her life had continued in this vein practically up to the time of the marriage. She and her husband remained together a few months, and after the divorce it was as if she had emerged from a bad dream. She continued her studies, nearly completing the course and obtaining certification. She started teaching and soon began a brief affair with a janitor. She described it as a torrid romance which burned itself out in a few months. Again, her partner was an unlettered man, crude and insensitive as a lover. 9. When she presented herself for treatment she was depressed. She had by this time married a fellow professional and had a small child. Her husband was devoted to her and she to him. They were comfortable naturally and her depression was a puzzle to her. What have I got to be sad about? There had been the usual illnesses, deaths, and disappointments but none would explain the lingering, brooding quality of her melancholy, which had been with her since shortly after the marriage. The most careful analysis revealed nothing so remarkable in her early life which might account for her 2 earlier love relationships and her depression in this marriage. On the surface she seemed to suffer some degradation of love feelings, a distortion which made it possible for her to enjoy pleasure with coarse men whom she felt to be socially beneath her. Similarly, she found little pleasure in the marriage to a suitable mate. It is clear that it was necessary for her to suffer in a particular way to experience sexual pleasure. The humiliation she received from her earlier lovers was essential to great Icatyon. The honored role she occupied in her current marriage made it necessary for her to bring about her own suffering in the form of brooding depression. The dynamics underlying her depression are not unique, but they have a unique quality which is of interest. In her associations she saw herself as a black, ugly, ignorant, dirty little girl who could be loved by no one. She fairly wallowed in the perception of herself as such a creature with degraded sexual appetites. She fantasied herself as a prostitute, a call girl, a promiscuous woman, and the most painful percept was as a helpless sexual object available to contemptuous white men at their whim. To indulge in the latter fantasy was like probing a painful wound. Her route to the OVCE took her through a section of the city where she saw black prostitutes soliciting white men as they drove past. On occasion she herself would be hailed by one of the white motorists. These events, together with her experiences in the South, served as the nodal point, where reality and fantasy fused. She had developed feelings based in part on reality and in part on the most humiliating experience she could imagine. The point we wish to make is that the most humiliating thing she could conceive lay so close to real experience that it takes a NEI to separate them. Moreover, the fantasied experience would not have to be manufactured to become real. She had offers from time to time. Ever since her adolescent years, the society in which she lived provided an inviting pathway to a degrading way of life. Her white counterpart may have identical fantasies, but the social order has been designed to protect her from her impulses and stands between her and those who would invite her along such a path. In order to live out her fantasies, the white girl would have to breach significant social barriers. Bertha had no such protective barriers and had to struggle alone to avoid such a life. Her depression and its accompanying fantasies, then, had a much deeper quality. She could say, "I know I am a whore at heart, society con RMS it. I know I am suitable only for casual sexual use, society con RMS it." Therefore the task of showing her the neurotic elements in her depression was infinitely greater. She could 11. Always turn, net to her infantile coneists, but to the outside world, and end confirmation of the distorted view she held of herself. She could justify her interest in the lower-class lovers by the self-percept they were the appropriate men to share her degraded appetites. Her present husband did not know what a monster he had married. He deserved a good, clean, pretty, light-skinned girl who had more conventional romantic tastes. This idea was supported by the fact that indeed mom of his colleagues had married light-skinned Negro women. As a result of the insidious linking of social oppression and neurotic guilt, Bertha was burdened with a depression which was most refractory to treatment. Long periods were necessary for the careful examination of black-white relations. The onions of history and contemporary life was studied with her. Prostitution and its subtleties, as well as sexuality in general, were examined in great detail with the purpose of objectifying events and social realities and showing that they had an existence outside yourself. It was necessary to consider in detail what her life might be like in another country which did not have the racist history of the United States. All this was necessary because she perceived the racial situation in the United States as an intensely personal phenomenon. She thought it a fundamental truth that black women with thick lips and short kinky hair were ugly. Intellectually she could discuss varying standards of beauty, but they had no relevance for her 5 kg was ugly. She felt in her bones that Negroes were helpless in encounters with white people and that black women were helpless before white men. All these attitudes were not conscious, but they were not buried very deep. It was necessary to help her see that these factors were independent of her. She had to see that beauty depends on the culture and that sexual desire is largely physiology. Only by separating the internal and external factors could she begin to see the neurotic use to which she had put racial prejudice. She could then turn nally to her own troubled development for answers to her current psychological dilemma. The essence of the situation is that black women have a nearly bottomless well of self-depreciation into which they can drop when depressed. The well is prepared by society and stands waiting, a prefabricated pit which they have had no hand in fashioning. John. Let us now tell you about John. Some years ago he sought psychiatric help because he was facing court action. In an outburst of temper he had injured a fellow worker and was being sued. His lawyer asked for a psychiatrist's statement and wanted it on record that John needed treatment. Initially John made certain that he told only enough to aid in his defense. Soon, however, he dropped his guard and told of his worries about his work record. He was highly trained, had several university degrees, and was currently employed as a professional. The assault jeopardized his job. But, he said, he had regularly found new jobs. He had done well in them and as he rose to the top became increasingly anxious and managed to louse up the situation. In the end he generally quit the job to do something more promising. And now, however, he was fright. 13. And. With a record of assault and the job he might have great difficulty in moving to something better. In this troubled state he decided to remain in treatment and in the ensuing months the following story emerged. He was the older of 2 children. His father had been a sickly man, stem wpqsh and his wife, but withal there was a mood of rectitude, propriety, and great ambition for his son. The older man was never able to work regularly and he died when John was in his late teens. John's mother worked to supplement the father's pension ts. She was the strong spine, all-supporting, and unrelenting in prodding the boy to excel in school. She was close to him, his only confidante. He recalled the numerous small ways he tried to break away from her but always to fall back, to come back to her for solace and understanding. Indeed, he said many times, she was the only one I could talk to. His sister seemed unimportant to him. Though bright, she did poorly in school. She became pregnant as an adolescent, married, and now has 8 children. Her life is a struggle to support the children. John was ashamed of her. He was brilliant and articulate and had a commanding presence. In school and university his record was outstanding. On new jobs, the initial impression he made was favorable. But he was aware that as time went on he began to gloss over tasks which he chose not to perform. He had a remarkable store of energy and with each new job he began with a flurry of activity. In time, however, he characteristically passed over details, a practice which eventually put him at a disadvantage. In respect he pondered why he made these choices which inevitably led to his downfall. On occasion he worked at 2 full-time jobs and took a full course at the university. His capacity for work seemed unlimited but his capacity for tolerating success was another matter. He was a passive boy, frightened of his father if he were disobedient and clinging to his mother as her model son. His crippling symptom, however, had to do with work and, in a larger sense, with success. It all came to focus on a job he obtained while in treatment. He joined an executive training program with a group of eager young men who were to compete against one another for a few positions that led rapidly up the management ladder. He entered the scene full of confidence and as he compared himself with the others he saw that he had many advantages. He performed brilliantly in the classroom. On occasion he felt dismay over what seemed to be a pervasive confidence in his white middle-class competitors. He observed that he could shake them by displaying greater knowledge but they seemed to possess a resilience which he found difficult to understand since he was convinced that they simply did not know very much. On the early high tide of success John turned his energies to innovation. Within the RST month of training he analyzed the manner in which new material was offered and outlined a method of presentation which was better than the one in use. His superiors were much impressed and incorporated some of his ideas into the training program. They suggested that he might make a significant contribution if he reviewed the complete training program and made suggestions at a later point when he had 15. Become more familiar with the TOTAI operation of the company. At about this time the training schedule called for a week of specialized study in their city, and John's entire class was owned to that city and given comfortable hostel accommodations. Experts in related fields were brought in to conduct 10-110 sessions, and an intensive intellectual competition among the members of the class was encouraged. John returned from the trip shaken. He said that in the course of the week all his confidence left him. It was hard to judge, but he thought that his general performance was adequate, not outstanding. Of great concern to him were his own inner feelings of incompetence and uncertainty, which were in direct contrast to the feelings he had had prior to attending the conference. The crux of the problem seemed to lie in the luxurious surroundings. John described the plush carpets, the spacious rooms, the thick steaks, and the unlimited supply of liquor, all paid for by the company. And perhaps the most troubling aspect of the whole situation was the ease with which John's white colleagues seemed to accept this bounty as the most natural thing in the world. He described them striding about the rich rooms, smoking cigars, acting as if they were already full-edged officers of the company. He, on the other hand, felt frightened, out of place, hungry for the money and luxury he saw about him, but fearful that his eagerness and greed might be too apparent and that, having laid eyes on the promised land, it would be snatched away from him. As a result, he felt that he was pressing too hard in the classroom sessions. It was difficult to sleep at night, wondering what might be asked the next day, feeling that upon his "Who's angry?" answer to each question rested the possibility of being shut out of wealth forever. This experience represented the downward shift in his functioning and the serious drop in the high hopes he had brought to the training period. After his return to the city and the resumption of the ordinary pace of training, his spirits gradually rose and his functioning improved. Neither, however, reached their former heights. The work in therapy now focused on his relationship with others on the job. He was troubled and wanted to establish the proper relationship with other Negroes who had jobs inferior to his own. He regarded it as an article of faith that he must do anything and everything to convey to them that he was a brother. He was ingenious in the clever ways he devised to overcome their initial suspicion of him. He genuinely felt a sense of brotherhood with them and wanted them to know that although he was in an executive training program, he had not abandoned his own people. He felt uneasy with white employees at a level below his own. He wanted friendly relationships with them but was afraid that those who had strong anti-Negro feelings would seize every opportunity to sabotage him. He felt he could ill afford to befriend a person who might jeopardize this valuable opportunity. On occasion, the genuine openness and friendliness of a white subordinate overcame John's apprehension and he responded with a ode of friendship. At other times, his suspicion was confirmed by some minor treachery and he pulled back to resume an attitude of circumspection. On one occasion an immediate superior suggested that he take more care with his dress, pointing out that his shoes were not shined and that his suit looked a bit seedy. This hurt him deeply and he resolved never to dress in a way that would expose him to such pain again. On previous jobs when his superiors were female he was aware that he performed better. He seemed always able to do well under these circumstances and to impress his superiors with a performance. In this company all his superiors were men and he never felt that they fully appreciated the high quality of his work and the full range of his potential. In this connection his dreams were particularly helpful. He was apprehensive and troubled about the prospect of success on the job and he had recurrent dreams of returning to the 01D neighborhood and to the household of his childhood. His associations made it clear that the house and neighborhood expressed a longing for the comforting presence of a mother who had played an important and reassuring role in his early years. Further, his dreams on numerous occasions wove together images of his boss and his father into a frightening composite man who pursued him with deadly intent. The nightmare quality of these dreams re-acted his more anguished moments on the job. They also helped him to understand how it was that he was so easily made anxious by a male superior. While the training program was complex and comprehensive, the essential skill to be mastered and demonstrated was the capacity for supervision. This was the crux of the matter. The company wanted capable, skillful, resourceful supervisors and wanted to weed out under the pressure of competition those aspirants who did not have this capacity. When this became clear, John was troubled by the difficulty he had in being RM with subordinates. 18. Who's angry? With Negro subordinates he thought he would be misunderstood and that they would think him even more white than his colleagues. Not wanting to give such an impression, he was INCON-ICT when called upon to judge his Negro subordinates. He was in a different kind of quandary with his white. Them they would complain that he was abusing his P031 and using his advantage to act out his own anti-white feelings. The problem was further complicated in that some of his subordinates were white women who on occasion were seductive in their behavior. He was particularly alarmed when he found himself attracted to one such woman and went to extraordinary efforts to avoid being in her presence. With others he was tormented with the fear that when he declined their invitations they would retaliate in some manner that would place him in jeopardy. When, as a result of therapeutic efforts, he was able to be relatively objective and render ARM disciplinary judgment without reference to race or sex, he felt that a milestone had been passed. As the training continued, John had periods of high excitement and alternating moods of depression. He was exhilarated by his triumphs and devastated by his setbacks. Throughout the lengthening period, however, there was a nagging concern over a particular area of his work. From time to time he would dismiss it from his mind, hoping that he would eventually improve in this area, and on other occasions he would struggle with it but the matter seemed never to be set right. As the details of his work came into sharper focus in therapy and in his own 19. mind, it became clear that the area of uncertainty was the one area of his functioning with the company which was of most importance to Pro-TS, having to do with sales and collections. At about this time his supervisor called him in and told him that his continuing deficiency was serious and was likely to jeopardize his success in the program. John felt trapped and tried desperately to do better, but to no avail. His depression deepened, his efficiency dropped, and he was nearly dismissed as a failure. This story of an eager aspirant for the rewards of this society who was caught in snares, some but not all of his own making, may appear to be unexceptional and in no way different from the story which might be told of his white colleagues who also failed at the task. The point we wish to make by means of this unhappy chronicle has to do with the setting in which it takes place, the setting, that is, as John sees it. We take the position that his view of his world is central to his ability to succeed. We seek in no way to minimize the importance of his intrapsychic experiences, nor would we minimize the importance of the intrapersonal involvements which played such an important part. We simply mean to say that it is very much like the common dynamics of a man and a woman meeting and falling in love. The relationship might be identical whether the couple be a pair of black migrant farm workers or a well-to-do young white couple in an affluent Connecticut suburb. We simply say that the course of their love will be profoundly influenced by the world in which they live and the manner in which they see their world. In like manner, the aspirant for an important position may succeed or fail according to his own brilliance. 20. Who's angry? Stupidity, avarice, or self-destructive trends. His success or failure may in addition be burdened by the prejudice of white employers. We seek to focus attention on the man's reaction to failure. John found himself profoundly intimidated by the luxury he encountered during the week-long training period. He felt himself tempted by greed to offer any part of himself, or all of himself, in exchange for such riches. He was alarmed by his reaction and it made him even more afraid that, coming so close, he might now fail to perform and lose this opportunity. He experienced considerable anxiety when he found it necessary to wield power over others. The therapeutic work with him made it clear that this situation reactivated concepts regarding identification with his father, but in a larger sense he was troubled by a realistic concern having to do with the uneasy position of a black man wielding power in a hostile white society. To do so brought him into direct competition with white men in a frankly open encounter. John's milieu from cradle to consultation room had put a penalty on success. He was allowed to be outstanding among black people but was penalized when he competed successfully against whites. This was consistent with his experience as a child. His parents were accepting of his achievements as an obedient child, but they were critical of any advance beyond childhood. The environment of his adult life was then perceived as reinforcing an unfortunate aspect of his family experience. He was encouraged to be an outstanding child Negro, but harsh penalties were invoked if he behaved as an adult. This 21. Powerful interlocking of family milieu and social attitudes has presented a barrier to him and his black brethren which is felt by no other ethnic group in America. One of the problems in understanding the discontent of black people in America is highlighted in this material. The relationship between intrapsychic functioning and the larger social environment is exceedingly complex. Among other things, Negroes want to change inside, but it's difficult to do so unless things outside are changed as well. It is clear that the simplistic solution of more education is meaningless when a society is more attuned to race than it is to academic achievement. Finally, the complex milieu in which American Negroes live has been shaped by their presence and continues to alter its form in response to this troublesome tenth of the population. Americans characteristically are unwilling to think about the past. We are a future-oriented nation, and facing backward is an impediment to progress. Although these attitudes may propel us to the moon, they are deficient when human concept needs resolution. They bring white Americans to an impasse when they claim to understand black people. After all, the thoughts begin, the Negro is also an American, and if he is different it is only a matter of degree. Clichés are brought forth and there is a lengthy recitation of the names of famous Negroes. Long association has bred feelings of familiarity which masquerade as knowledge. But there remain puzzles about black people, all is not understood, something is missing. 23. For if the black American is to be truly understood, his history must be made intelligible. It is a history that is interwoven with that of this country, although it is rarely reported with candor. In recent years superficial studies of Negroes have been made. For those few who truly search, the past of the black man is seen re-acted in his daily life. It is evident in character structure and child rearing. It can be heard on a Sunday morning in a Baptist church. It reveals itself in the temper of the ghetto and in the emerging rage now threatening to shatter this nation, a nation the black man helped to build. A few black people may hide their scars, but most harbor the wounds of yesterday. The black man of today is at one end of a psychological continuum which reaches back in time to his enslaved ancestors. Observe closely at man on a Harlem street corner and it can be seen how little his life experience differs from that of his forebears. However much the externals differ, their inner life is remarkably the same. On a cold morning one of the authors sat watching a group of black men. They were standing outside an of CE for casual laborers in clusters of 4 or VE. Some were talking and gesturing, but from a distance one could detect apathy in most. These were the hardcore unemployed. Their difficulties could be blamed on lack of education, personal maladjustments, or just plain laziness, and such a judgment would be partially correct. The greater truth was that they were black. Because of this fact, they had little chance of obtaining favorable or permanent work. They 24. Were doomed to spend endless gray mornings hoping to secure a day's work. A truck drove up and they stiffened. There was a ripple of excitement as a white man leaned out of the cab and squinted. As he ran his eyes past the different men, one could almost hear his thoughts. This one at 2T/AZN. That dark one 100%, 377244173 ALC and is probably 510W. The boy way in the back there might do. No imagination is required to see the scene as a direct remnant of slavery. Move back in time and this could be an auction block. The manual labor is the same and so is the ritual of selection. The white man involved in the selection feels he is only securing a crew. But, then, so did his forefathers. In addition, the psychic structure of the black men being selected has altered little since slavery. To know this is deeply troubling and frightening. A city erupts in fury. Its residents are appalled and outraged. Biracial committees are appointed and scapegoats appear from everywhere. Instead of wretched housing and steeing unemployment, outside agitators and wily communists are said to be the most important causes. Always the basic reasons are at best minimized and at worst denied. After 3 centuries of oppression, the black man is still thought to need a provocateur to iname him. History is forgotten. There is little record of the RST Africans brought to this country. They were stripped of everything. A calculated cruelty was begun, designed to crush their spirit. After they were settled in the white 25 man's land, the malice continued. When slavery ended and large-scale physical abuse was discontinued, it was supplanted by different but equally damaging abuse. The cruelty continued unabated in thoughts, feelings, intimidation and occasional lynching. Black people were consigned to a place outside the human family, and the whip of the plantation was replaced by the boundaries of the ghetto. The culture of slavery was never undone for either master or slave. The civilization that tolerated slavery dropped its slave-holding cloak, but the inner feelings remained. The peculiar institution continues to exert its evil influence over the nation. The practice of slavery stopped over 100 years ago, but the minds of our citizens have never been freed. To be a bondsman was to experience a psychological development very different from the masters. Slavery required the creation of a particular kind of person, one compatible with a life of involuntary servitude. The ideal slave had to be absolutely dependent and have a deep consciousness of personal inferiority. His color was made the badge of that degradation. And as a NAL precaution, he was instilled with a sense of the unlimited power of his master. Teachings so painstakingly applied do not disappear easily. The white man tried to justify the lot of the slave in many ways. One explanation made the slave a simple child who needed the protective guardianship of a benevolent parent. For many whites this distortion has persisted to the present. A modern version holds that black people are little different from other citizens save for a paucity of education and money. The reason for these deficiencies is left vague. The observer is left with the comfortable feeling that blacks are stunted in growth, have profligate ways, and are uninterested in learning. This attitude obscures the multitude of wrongs and the ruthless oppression of blacks, from slavery to now. The Negro man of 80 told a story. He was 12 and a playmate was tied _a cage waiting to be taken away and lynched. The shackled boy stood accused of raping a white woman. The old man recalled the fright which caused him to run away the next day. From that time on he never knew a home. His years were spent roaming about the country. He became an itinerant preacher, forever invoking God, but always too tired to return to his place of birth. When asked why, he would reply, "The white folks down there are too mean." For most of his life he was tortured by memories. Every place he stopped, he soon became frightened and moved on. Sometimes in the middle of a sermon he would cry out, "How could they do that to a boy?" This old man is even now living in one of our cities. He continues to preach in storefront churches. At times he may encounter whites who smile benevolently at his quaintness and apparent exaggerations. But his memories are real and his hatred, however masked, is a burning re. Because of an inattention to history, the present-day Negro is compared unfavorably with other racial and ethnic groups who have come to this country. Major differences in backgrounds are ignored. The black man was brought to this country forcibly and was completely cut off from his PM, he was robbed of language and 27. Culture. He was forbidden to be an African and never allowed to be an American. After the RST generation and with each new group of slaves, the black man had only his American experience to draw on. For most Negroes, the impact of the experience has been so great as to even now account for a lack of knowledge of their past. This can be contrasted with the heritage of the American Indian. He truly has known the violence of white America, but his legacies are of a different sort. Now, decimated and forlorn, survivors can nevertheless tell tales of past glories. At least in reliving the time when his people ruled the land, the Indian can vicariously achieve a measure of dignity. Various groups that have come to these shores have been able to maintain some continuity of social institutions. In the process of Americanization, they have retained an identikation with their homeland. The Chinese, who in many instances functioned virtually as slaves, were allowed to preserve a family structure. Other oppressed groups, notably the Irish and Italians, were never infused with the shame of color. In addition, they had the protection and support of the Roman Catholic Church. Except for the Negro, all sizable groups in America have been able to keep some old customs and traditions. The black experience in this country has been of a different kind. It began with slavery and with the rupture of continuity and an annihilation of the past. Even now ego/9 generation, grow up alone. Many individual blacks feel a desperate aloneness not readily explained. The authors have heard stories telling of each generation's isolation from every other. Non-black groups pass on proud traditions, conscious of the dignity they are conferring. For black people, values and rituals are shared and indeed transmitted, but with little acknowledgement of their worth. The Jew achieves a sense of ethnic cohesiveness through religion and a pride in background, while the black man stands in solitude. K/FDULLLB. In them, the white American has created a blindness for himself which has a peculiar effect on blacks. In psychotherapeutic sessions, Negroes are preoccupied with determining just how many of their difficulties are a consequence of the prejudice of whites. And while there is sometimes the tendency to attribute everything to white cruelty, there is often the opposite tendency, a determination not to see. They may insist that white oppression has never exerted any influence on their lives, even in the face of such realities as police brutality, job and housing discrimination, and a denial of educational opportunities. It is a powerful national trait, this willful blindness to the abuse of blacks in America. It is a blindness that includes the victim as well as the crime. An 87-year-old woman was born in the Deep South, the result of a union between one of the black girls on the place and the son of the white landowner. Years later she was told how, at her birth, the white mistress of the big house heard that her son had fathered a child. The young mother was summoned to bring the child for an audience with the grandmother. The old lady admired the child, and noting her fairness, suggested that she be taken and raised as white. The mother objected, "She is my child and I'll keep her." 29. Even into old age, this Negro woman admired the courage of her mother. She spoke about the thin line separating the races. AIP of the coin could decide whether one was colored or white. The relationship between black and white is complex. This association has affected the white parm, less than the black, but the effect on the white partner has had more significance since he has been the policy maker. An analysis of the relationship tells much about the American national character. Attitudes of the kind directed toward blacks, rooted deep in the fabric of this country, clearly have significant influence on many decisions. A nation which has made the despising of blacks a unique element of its identity is at a profound disadvantage when called upon to lock arms with people of other lands and form a brotherhood of nations. A focus on the black partner yields information of a different sort. To be colored has meant far more than riding in the back of the bus. To be sure, there is great misery in being the last hired and read and relegated to decaying sections of town, but there is enduring grief in being made to feel inferior. The old woman may have been fortunate in her awareness of that early choice. She is at least mindful of some of the factors in that selection. For most of her people, this is rarely the case. Their treatment is designed to impress them with their lowly position. The role of inferiority into which they have been cast has affected them deeply, but if the wounds are not physical, they are easily ignored. The American black man is unique, but he has no SPE. 30. Child psychology or exceptional genetic determinants. His mental mechanisms are the same as other men. If he undergoes emotional ICT, he will respond as neurotically as his white brother. In understanding him we return to the same reference point, Since all other explanations fail, we must conclude that much of the pathology we see in black people had its genesis in slavery. The culture that was born in that experience of bondage has been passed from generation to generation. Constricting adaptations developed during some long ago time continue as contemporary character traits. That they are so little altered attests to the zity of the black-white relationship, which has seen little change since the birth of this country. Long ago in the United States basic decisions were made. The most important of these made color the crucial variable. This began as the cornerstone of the system of black slavery. After renaments, it has remained to become embedded in the national character. Persisting to this day is an attitude, shared by black and white alike, that blacks are inferior. This belief permeates every facet of this country, and it is the etiological agent from which has developed the national sickness. The early farmers who migrated to this country were no more evil than other men. Many had fled from intolerable situations, caste systems, and religious warfare. They came led with hope. A chance combination offered these early farmers fertile land and slaves. Initially, these slaves may have been black or white or, in the odd case, Indian. The country expanded and more land became available for cultivation. Supply. 31. And demand followed a predictable course, and, with blacks available in large numbers, the African remained as the only bondsman. Generations passed and the white master and the black slave became more dependent on each other economically and psychologically. Their lives took on a symbiotic quality. When eventually the white assumed absolute power over the black, the psychology of each was changed. The reasoning which allowed these atrocities infused itself into the national thought. To hide and rationalize the barbarism, the jus dication became national in scope. All Americans were not slaveholders, but until a short while ago this was essentially a nation of farmers. A man working a harsh land knows that one uses whatever tools are available, and he would not criticize his neighbor who held slaves. The early white Americans were free of English common 121%. They were not a colony as was Brazil, subject to the laws of a European country with a long tradition of dealing with slaves. There were no powerful clerics, such as in the Catholic Church, to insist that slaves had rights. And with a burgeoning economy, everyone was willing to continue any practice which might bring more goods into the marketplace. The nation became involved in a bizarre system of reasoning about slaves. No longer were they simply unfortunate beings caught up in an economic system which exploited their labor. Now they were to be subhuman quasi-humans who not only preferred slavery but felt it best for them. The American had to hide from himself and others his oppression of blacks. To be safe, the entire country had to share in the denial. 32. In the second half of the 20th century the posture of the nation generally is only slightly changed. Long after slavery, many whites are haunted by a vision of being oppressed, exposed to the whims of a powerful cruel black man. To dissipate the fantasy, increasing barriers have had to be erected. In reality it seems a remote possibility that blacks might overthrow their oppressors and enslave them. But all men have the capacity to deceive themselves, and the entire country has participated in devising humiliating laws and customs. Pseudoscientific theories of racial superiority have been elaborated, and unreasoning fears of blacks have become a part of the national character. How else to explain such massive preparations for such an unlikely attack? An ex-serviceman recalled an incident. During World War II he was stationed in rural Montana. On a weekend he visited a nearby town. When he arrived he was the object of much wonder. No one in town had ever seen a black man before. He went into a restaurant. The manager was polite and friendly. He passed the time of day and allowed as how this was the first Negro he had ever laid eyes on. He talked about the town and the generous nature of its people, and then told the unfortunate brother that the restaurant had a policy against serving Negroes. White citizens have grown up with the identity of an American and, with that, the unresolved connivance of the slaveholder. White Americans are born into a culture which contains the hatred of blacks as an integral part. 33. Blacks are no longer the economic underpinnings of the nation. But they continue to be available as victims and therefore a ready object for the projection of hostile feelings. Throughout the country they are highly visible, by now useless for exploitation, and demanding participation in the affairs of the country. Because there has been so little change in attitudes, the children of bondage continue to suffer the effects of slavery. There is a timeless quality to the unconscious which transforms yesterday into today. The obsessions of slave and master continue. Both continue a deadly struggle of which neither is fully aware. It would seem that for most black people emancipation has yet to come. A harried young mother, having exhausted the resources of several social agencies, turned to the psychiatrist as a last resort. She had a pretty face but she was obese and wore frazzled clothes. As a result, she looked like a shapeless, middle-aged woman. On the RST visit she wore an ilting red wig which fell forward over her eyes. She made motions to right it, only to have it lodge over her ears. She told of her difficulties by describing various crises. The younger children were sick and 2 older boys had disappeared the previous evening. A riot had broken out on that same evening and she feared for the safety of her sons. She lived with her VE children in a rat-infested apartment. She had never been married and most of her 26 years had been spent in public housing projects, living on welfare grants. With VE children, she ran out of money near the middle of the month. Then her mother, who could scarcely afford it, would help her buy food. If the groceries were paid for, her roof would begin leaking, and once again she would call the housing of CE, only to be insulted. The NAL blow involved problems with a raunchy nigger. He had lived with her for several months and had disappeared when the last welfare check was late. The most bitter outburst was reserved for the welfare department. It was headed by a boss man who, she believed, found delight in harassing black women. No one had any privacy. The woman next door awakened in the middle of the night, trembling with fright, to discover that the noise at the window was a social worker peering in to determine if a man was sleeping there. The patient despised public charity, but having stopped school after the 9th grade, she found her meager skills of little use. Some of her neighbors worked as domestics, but only those with few or no children. If a woman had more than 2 young children, she could not earn enough to pay a sitter. On and on she went. Through most of her narrative she maintained her composure. But as she was relating an incident of little consequence, the tears came and, as she wept, her strength was revealed. She continued to talk of her life and its burdens. In a short lifetime she had been subjected to great suffering, but she was not defeated. With genuine humor she could acknowledge and laugh at her shortcomings. In the midst of tears, she became warm and chuckled as she related an incident about her children. Hidden in the despair was a distinctive vitality. It came out when she told of her church work or a meeting with a friend. As she spoke, her natural generosity was apparent. At the end of the hour she dried her eyes, rearranged her wig, and strode out. As she moved, a particular style came through. She was depressed, upset, angry, and had 35. Her share of problems. She moved slowly, but her head was high. She disappeared down the hall. One knew that in the agony of her life was the beauty and torment of the black experience in this country. If the resources and imperfections of this young such importance. Familiar concepts could adequately describe her intrapsychic con-ICT. We would search her past for early trauma, distorted relationships, and infantile con-ists. The social milieu from which she came would be considered but would not be given much weight. Our youthful subject, however, is black and this one fact transcends all others. She perceives herself and her surroundings in a manner deeply influenced by this fact. The dismal quality of her life shows how little society thinks of her. 6 generations have passed since slavery, and her view of life's possibilities is the same as that of a slave on a Georgia plantation. The reluctant conclusion is that her assets and liabilities are the same as that slave's. She is wily, resourceful, and practiced in the art of survival. But, like her soul sister in bondage, she is a victim from the time of her birth. This society has placed her at a disadvantage from which she cannot recover. However visible her defiance, the true burdens are subtle and strike at her soul. For the more we become immersed in her problems, the more her life spells out a tragedy. She meets her problems with ordinary defenses. But latter difficulties have existed for hundreds of years. The pathology she shows is common to most Negroes. The curbing of her aggression began at an early age. It was, in large measure, determined by a society that is frightened of her. Beneath her passivity lies anger which might otherwise be directed at white people. As a consequence, we see the dependency about which so much has been written. This is another legacy of slavery. In the morning of her life, she saw her mother and other black adults knowable to the whim of white persons. From this it would seem logical that she could become as helpless in this society as her enslaved ancestors. To be prevented from growing and maturing is to be kept in a state of dependency. The means by which she controls her anger have a direct link to the silent war between master and slave. She must be cautious. This may be why she speaks of the boss man with such bitterness. She sees him as free to hurt her, while she can never act on her hate for him. That they are both trapped in such an unequal contest is again a tribute to the unchanging nature of America. In meeting the world, she seems defensive, as if protecting herself from 1,000 slights. Her armor, however, guards against real danger. The suspiciousness may seem excessive, but to relax can be to invite disaster. If these types of character traits are seldom encountered in whites, it is because they do not face the same assaults or grow up in the same climate of hatred. As a result, this woman exhibits emotional weariness. The reality of being alternately attacked, ignored, then singled out for some cruel and undeserved punishment must extract its toll. That penalty may be a premature aging and an early death in some black people. To be regarded always as subhuman is a stultifying experience. It is people like our patient whom the nation now fears. Some feel that she threatens the basic social structure. There is a dread that Negroes will impoverish the country by proliferating on welfare rolls. Recently there has been a fear that they will gain political control of the cities now that whites are fleeing to the suburbs. No one can doubt that white America is afraid. If our black woman could wipe away the tears, she would laugh. Rect, if you will, the most powerful nation on earth, afraid of the poorest, least educated, most leaderless 10% of its population. Truly the white American projects his own hostility onto the latter-day slave. How else to understand his terror? Our young patient weeps for good reason. She has seen her hopes soar only to be frustrated. But where her parents retreated into their black world, she is now demanding more of the white man's world. After 3 centuries of oppression, along with other black people, she has made a vow. I will tar/. In the world of women, an abundance of feminine narcissism is not only a cheerful attribute but a vital necessity to emotional well-being. For a woman to invite and accept the love of a man whom she respects, she must feel herself to be eminently worthy of his interest and, in a deep and abiding sense, a lovable person. Such a conviction carries with it a compelling condensation grown out of the loving engagement of a mother with her precious child, of a family with a delightful little girl, and of a larger community likewise charmed by her. With these benevolent auspices, augmented by real physical attractiveness, the stage is set for the growth and development of a self-content woman who can enter 39. Wholeheartedly into love relationships, bringing a richness and a warmth to her mate and to the children who issue from their union. The RST measure of a child's worth is made by her mother, and if, as is the case with so many black people in America, that mother feels that she herself is a creature of little worth, this daughter, how? The girl can be loved and valued only within a limited sphere, and can never be the Allah's child, because she is who she is, black and inevitably linked to her black, depreciated mother, always seen to be lacking, deficient, and faulty in some way. Nor can the family or the community at large undo this attitude, since children, however wonderful they may be to adults, are always seen in terms of the future, and in this country the future of a dark girl is dark indeed. While under other circumstances a golden future might be imagined for her, at the very beginning of her life she is comforted and commiserated with and urged to overcome her handicaps, the handicap of being born black. A certain amount of feminine narcissism must rest ultimately on real physical attractiveness, and such attractiveness is determined by the artificial standard each community selects. In this country, the standard is the blonde, blue-eyed, white-skinned girl with regular features. Since communication media spread this ideal to every inhabitant of the land via television, newspapers, magazines, and motion pictures, there is not much room for deviation. Women expend great effort in bringing themselves to an approximation of the ideal. The girl who is black has no option in the matter of how much she will change herself. Her blackness is the antithesis of a creamy white skin, her lips are thick, her hair is kinky and short. She is, in fact, the antithesis of American beauty. However beautiful she might be in a different setting with different standards, in this country she is ugly. However loved and prized she may be by her mother, family, and community, she has no real basis of feminine attractiveness on which to build a sound feminine narcissism. When to her physical unattractiveness is added a discouraging, depreciating mother-family community environment into which she is born, there can be no doubt that she will develop a damaged self-concept and an impairment of her feminine narcissism which will have profound consequences for her character development. In addition, she takes her place within a historical context, in which women like her have never been valued, have been viewed only as depreciated sexual objects who serve as the recipients of certain debased passions of men who are ashamed to act them out with their own women. Historically she has had some value as a breeder of slaves and workmen. But most of all she has been viewed, as all black people have been viewed, as a source of labor, and she has been valued for the amount of work she can perform. Born thus, depreciated by her own kind, judged gross by her society, and valued only as a sexually convenient laboring animal, the black girl has the disheartening prospect of a life in which the cards are stacked against her, and the achievement of a healthy, mature womanhood seems a very long shot indeed. The 41. Miracle is that, in spite of such odds, the exceptional love of parents and the exceptional strength of many girls produce so many healthy, capable black women. One aspect of the black woman's life which attracts little attention from outsiders has to do with her hair. From the time of her birth, the little girl must submit to efforts aimed at changing Tuesday appearance of her hair. When she is a babe in arms her hair is brushed and stroked, but in short order the gentle brushing gives way to more vigorous brushing and ultimately combing. Her hair is kinky and combing is painful, but her mother must hold her and force her to submit to it. As far back as her memory will take her, the black woman recalls the painful daily ritual of having her hair combed. It is not insignificant that this painful process is administered in a dispassionate way by the mother. Surely the deadly logic of children would try to explain this phenomenon in some such fashion: if such pain is administered with such regularity by one who purports to love me, then the end result must be extremely important. And yet, however she might search, the child will never find a reason weighty enough to justify the pain to which she must submit. For, in fact, the combing and plaiting of the hair, in whatever stylish manner the mother may adopt, results only in the child's being rendered acceptable. The combing does not produce a stunningly beautiful child from an ugly one, but simply an acceptably groomed child. For the pain she goes through, she might well expect to be stopped on the street by strangers stunned by the beauty and the transformation wrought by the 42. Combing and the stylized plaits. Nor so. She is simply considered to be of an acceptable appearance. Again, the logic of children would raise the question: if mother has to inflict such pain on me to bring me to the level of acceptability, then I must have been ugly indeed before the combing. For the implications and regularity and torture involved suggest that it is of vital importance that the child not be seen in her natural state. Now there is nothing unique about grooming being painful for children. In fact, most people of the soap and water cultures may recall the agonies experienced as children when soap got in their eyes. But for most people the discomforts associated with soap, toothbrushes, combs, and slippery bathtubs are transient, experienced mainly by the child who has not quite mastered the technique. It takes only a few years to take most of the pain out of the use of soap and most of the danger out of slippery bathtubs. But for the black girl the combing continues as a daily ritual up to the magic day when she is introduced to the hairdresser. At the time of this writing the overwhelming majority of Negro women have their hair XED by some method, including the use of a hot comb. The hair is oiled and the heated comb is applied. Usually there is some incidental burning of the scalp. The ordeal itself is long and tiresome, involving hours spent waiting while the overworked beautician moves from customer to customer. To look presentable the woman must have her hair pressed every week, or at least every 2 weeks. Thus the black woman is never free of the painful. 43. Reminder that she must be transformed from her natural state to some other state in order to appear presentable to her fellow men. One might ask how this process differs from the ritual to which her Caucasian sister submits for the purpose of similar cosmetic effect. The difference may be any one, but it is crucial. The Caucasian woman can brush her hair with a minimum of discomfort and look quite acceptable for any public appearance. If she submits to the pain and discomfort of the hairdressers, it is for the purpose of beautification, it is to enhance her natural appearance, which in itself is considered acceptable by her peers. For black women, the pressing comb is like the curse of Eve, a painful, humiliating experience to which she is bound to submit, which, moreover, seems like a wretched legacy grafted into her by her mother. Almost without exception black women in treatment recall that awful day when they faced the swimming pool. The black woman's white companions with or without swimming caps plunged into the pool while she stood trembling on the edge, sure that her swimming cap would not tie tightly enough and that afterward she would remove her cap to end disaster. Women recall the few weeks at boarding school or college when the issue of having their hair pressed loomed so large. These recollections take on a humorous quality, but the humor is bitter. And nor all of it is humor. A black woman in treatment, who was a borderline schizophrenic, dreaded going to the beauty parlor. She got 44. Achieving womanhood. Upset whenever she went, and on occasion a visit would be the precipitating incident of her illness. She became delusional and hallucinated. She was terry-eyed in the beauty parlor and thought that the beauticians were whispering behind her back, plotting to do dreadful things to her, and at the very least engaging in malicious gossip. She as terry-eyed of submnt. Ting het self to tea associations were to the painful hair combing administered by her devoted grandmother. In her mind the question was never resolved. Did grandmother truly take pleasure in hurting her? This woman's weak ego may have allowed her to give voice to the silent puzzlement of her countless healthier sisters. As if this were not sufficient, there is one nal degradation associated with hair. Passionate love-making is a vigorous business and too-eld hair is to be expected, but if a woman perspires too freely, her pressed hair becomes kinky and must be straightened. And thus even in the triumphant bed of Eros she is reminded that what should be her crowning glory is in fact a crown of shame. It is against this endless circle of shame, humiliation, and the implied unacceptability of one's own person that a small but significant number of black women have turned to the natural hairdo: no hot irons, no pressing combs, no oils, but a soft, black, gentle cloche of cropped velvet. The effect is so engaging and feminine, and, in light of the above, so psychologically redemptive, that we can only wonder why it has taken them so long, and why even yet there are so few. Publications designed for Negro audiences have always found a certain group of advertisers eager to purchase space. These are the merchants of bleaching creams. The 45. Buyers are promised that the cream will make them 2 or 3 shades lighter. The advertising space and the prominent display of these items in neighborhood stores provide objective evidence of what every ghetto dweller knows. Black women have spent fortunes trying to be white. Long, straight hair and a fair skin have seemed to be the requirements for escaping the misery of being a black woman. One can only guess at the agony of the countless black women who spent their hard-earned money for a bottled, emulsified escape from being the way they are. And it is difficult to imagine their frustration and hopelessness when they now realized that they could not change their hair or their color. There surely is nothing more cruelly contained than the feminine narcissism in American black women. To paraphrase County Cullen. And yet I wonder at this thing. To make a woman black and bid her sing. There have been lesser sources of misery too, as if these were not enough. Black women felt ashamed if their feet were big. They hid their feet and bought shoes that were too small and often earned a lifetime of foot problems. Most cultures associate big feet with lower class origins and thus the women value small feet. For the American Negro, lower class does N01 adequately state the condition he wants to rise above. For him, lower class has overtones of slavery and the lash, and the black woman's shame when her feet are large is therefore a deeper wound and a more lasting hurt. They have also felt a special misery over skinny legs and small breasts. In fact, there was a heightened concern over all the criteria of femininity, all the criteria of physical beauty thrust upon them by a society which held beauty to be the opposite of what they were. The softly seductive, essentially feminine quality of women is at its height during adolescence. In this country great efforts are expended in extending the period, both backward and forward. Backward, to the pre-adolescence of 11 and 12-year-olds, and forward, past the 60s and 70s to the end of a woman's life. Whatever the chronological boundaries, the effort clearly is to extend them and make it possible for a woman to appear more feminine for a longer period of her life. For a great many black women, however, the process is reversed. Black women seem unconsciously to shorten this period more drastically than their poor circumstances might necessitate. In their 30s and 40s they seem to give up competition for male interest. They neglect their girls, allow themselves to become obese, concern themselves more with the utility of their clothing and less with style, and resign themselves to a relatively asexual maternal role in which work and a hovering concern for the family occupies them entirely. They give the impression that they have no interest in men in a sexual way. The total effect such women give can be startling. A group of relatively poor black mothers who were seen in therapy appeared at first glance to be in their 40s or 50s. They were, however, all in their late 20s. Their shapeless garments, unattractive shoes, dental neglect, and general disinterest in their appearance made them seem 20 to 30 years older than they actually were. A similar disinterest in physical appearance may be observer will see a sharper, chronologically earlier, and a much more widespread relinquishment of youth on the part of black women. The abandonment of youthful narcissism and the associated competition for male attention can occur at even earlier ages, and in fact may begin at such an early age as to subvert even the high-spirited period of adolescence. Those who deal with the problems of adolescence are concerned about the high frequency of obesity in Negro girls. The authors are well aware that obesity is a problem of adolescence for young girls of every ethnic origin in the United States. But statistics seem to show that obesity is very much more frequent among black girls. It is also well known that women and mothers who ND themselves heavily burdened with problems of day-to-day management and survival it difficult to expend much energy on feminine frills and nary. But the incidence of abandonment of feminine adornment and narcissistic interest is much greater among black women and is not a direct function of their poverty or disadvantaged circumstances. In fact, however slow has been the movement of black people as a group toward greater advantages, a small rise in income lifts the burden of black women to a very significant degree. Only a short time ago her task as a homemaker was prodigious. Home appliances are relatively recent luxuries. One would think, therefore, that she would now have more time and more energy to devote to her own person and to the pleasures of femininity. but the whole issue of work and responsibility has no place in any attempt to explain the obesity and the associated abandonment of sexual competition by adolescent black girls. If this surrender cuts across all age groups, one must look for other reasons. The most satisfactory explanation would be that femininity is only imperfectly grasped by most black women in any event, since femininity in this society is denied in such terms that it is out of reach for her. If the society says that to be attractive is to be white, she nds herself unwittingly striving to be something she cannot possibly be, and if femininity is rooted in feeling oneself eminently lovable, then a society which views her as unattractive and repellent has also denied her this fundamental wellspring of femininity. So it may be that after a brief struggle a black woman feels that femininity, as it is denied in these terms, is something she cannot achieve. Rather than having her heart broken every day, she relinquishes the struggle and diverts her interest elsewhere. She has derived none of the intensely personal satisfaction she might have received as an honored and desirable sexual object. There is another factor in her ready rejection of youth, and it has deep historical roots. It has been said that beauty is a curse to a subject woman. From the time black people arrived in this country up to the very recent years. 49. Black women have been sexually available to any white man who felt so inclined. They were nor protected by the laws, and their men stood in jeopardy of life if a hand was raised in their defense. For the slave or subject woman, youth and beauty meant arousing the interest of the oppressor and exposure to sexual exploitation. The black girl found herself in a peculiar vice. If her dreams were realized and she grew into a beauty, her problems were far from solved and had in fact only begun. She now attracted the attention of the oppressor, who turned her femininity to the service of his own sexual appetite. Thus youth and beauty, though desired, were also dreaded as the certain bearer of trouble and strife. Even now, the pressures on the pretty girl of the ghetto are great, and it requires a special heroism for her to avoid the identity of an anonymous sexual object. Small wonder that black women the beauty of youth. Much of our discussion has dealt with feminine narcissism from a genetic, dynamic, and adaptive point of view. But the perception of oneself in a favorable light includes the identication of oneself in a historical, sequential sense as well. Group identity and the gathering to oneself of the joys and sufferings of one's forebears play an important part in the construction of a self-identity. The United States presents to all its citizens, but most vividly to the black woman, a negative as well as a positive ideal. The positive ideal, as mentioned above, is in many ways unobtainable for her, inasmuch as it really involves trying to become less Negro and more white. She must be clean, neat, modest, subdued, with hair straightened and hopefully with skin lightened. The negative ideal or paradigm is the black, slovenly, obese, dirty, promiscuous woman. But of all the words, perhaps the most important are those that designate the black woman as ugly and repellent. Of the two forces moving her, the pull and attraction of the positive ideal and the push and repulsion of the negative, the latter is by far the more powerful. Her situation is made worse by the fact that she can by no means approximate the positive ideal and feels always in danger of ending herself too close to the negative. Moreover, the central position of feminine narcissism in the development of character presents a problem for the black woman in her evaluation of her intelligence. Intellectual achievement is closely linked to healthy narcissism. With an impairment of narcissism, a sound synthesis of intellectual accomplishment within the character structure is difficult to achieve. The full outing of a woman's sexual function and her capacity to enjoy it are based on her evaluation of herself. If she considers herself an especially worthwhile person, she can joyfully submit to her lover, knowing that he will likewise prize and value her. Her enjoyment of the sexual function will not be impaired by the feeling of being degraded by the man. There is, however, a more subtle interaction between narcissism and the sexual function in women. There is a natural inclination for a woman to yield herself to a powerful lover, gaining additional narcissistic supplies in her possession of him. Her own high evaluation of herself, in turn, evokes in the man a similar high evaluation of her. If her narcissism is impaired, the sexual act is a degrading submission. 51. To a man who does nor value her, and she arises from it feeling a loss of self-esteem rather than a personal enhancement. The Negro woman's black face, African features, and kinky hair are physical attributes which place her far from the American ideal of beauty, and make her, with reference to the American ideal, ugly. When the feeling of ugliness is reinforced by the rejection of family and society, the growing girl develops a feeling not only of being undesirable and unwanted but also of being mutilated, of having been fashioned by nature in an ill-favored manner. Anatomy determines that every little girl will struggle with feelings of having been injured and mutilated when she compares her sexual organs with the male's, but under normal circumstances the compensatory blossoming of narcissism allows her to develop a feeling of satisfaction with herself. The black woman's feelings of mutilation, both psychical and physical, are strengthened by her experiences, and she is guarded from self-depreciation only by an enfeebled narcissism. As a result, her personal ambitions as an adolescent and her capacity to live out her aspirations suffer. Under the sign of discouragement and rejection which governs so much of her physical operation, she is inclined to organize her personal ambitions in terms of her achievements and to end these achievements serving to compensate for other losses and hurts. A dark woman who had risen rapidly in her profession experienced a worsening of her chronic depression. As her achievements grew, she found opportunistic men taking an interest in her. She developed intense feelings. Q52. Achieving woman /900D. Of bitterness about her job, which she felt was the only element in her attractiveness to men. She was bitter about her intellect which had brought her to her present position. She now was attractive to men who were shallow, opportunistic fortune seekers. To compound her misery, she felt an inclination to accept even these shallow men for whatever they wanted in her. In choosing a mate, the black woman is again faced with the undesirability of her blackness and with the fact that it is the rare black man who can resist the omnipresent presentation of the white ideal. The compromises that are necessary in the establishment of any relationship between a man and a woman can easily be felt by her to be profound compromises with her own aspirations for a love relationship. She may feel that the compromises are based, not on the difficulties faced by two quite different individuals in adjusting to an intimate union, but on the fact that her unattractiveness makes it impossible for her to obtain the ideal man. Thus, the contemporary implications of her Negromess and the historical identity it imposes on her make her progress to healthy womanhood much more difficult. The problems we have spelled out here represent barriers which are high but not insurmountable. Because we also see evidence of the remarkable capacity of black people in America to survive, we see one of the adaptive modes chosen by black women to make their way in a hostile world. With youthful narcissism crushed and sexual life perverted, they drew back from these modes as primary means of life expression. Letting youth G0, beauty go, and sex go, they narrowed their vision to the most. 53. Essential feminine function: mothering, nurturing, and protecting their children. In such a role the black woman has been the salvation of many a family. To call such a family matriarchal, as many have done, is to obscure the essential maternal function and to suggest an authoritarian for authority's sake. Suggest cruelty on all sides, and as a result centered her concern on the most essential quality of womanhood. In so doing she stood by her mate or in his stead when he was crippled or crushed by the appriscore. The mother in the play Raisin in the Sim, who stands as a bulwark of reason between her family and an irrational world, re-echoes the perception by black women of that essential female function of mothering and its triumph in a world which robs her of other joys. So much of black women's suffering has grown out of the same feeling of helplessness that has pilloried the male. With the new black movements underway, all that we have just said may assume merely historical significance. The contorted efforts to be white, the shame of the black body, the rejection of youth may all vanish quickly. Negro women need only see that, truly, a black is beautiful. Jimmy was a 12-year-old boy whose rapid growth had left him gawky and uncomfortable. He sat slumped in a chair, trying to conceal his ill-fitting clothes. His face was jet black, and his expressions ranged from somber to sad. Whether relating stories of home, school, or the streets, he disguised his true feelings. At 12 he had learned one of his RST lessons: always play it cool. As much as possible, he worked to hide his inner life. One day he stared long and hard at his ST and said, "I want to hit a white man." For once, the therapist could. 55. Sense an uncensored outpouring of feelings. Then Jimmy frowned, started another sentence, and began to cry. The anger was welcome, if unexpected, but the comment was surprising. In over 3 months of weekly visits, the boy had never directly mentioned white people. There had been allusions to trouble at school with boys who were not bloods, and once he talked of his father's job at a kin factory, where there were few Negroes. But Jimmy had never spoken in terms of racial feelings or problems. He had never directly felt antagonism from a white person, but when his anger spilled over, he chose that target. He was a quiet, introverted boy who found it difficult to talk for FTY minutes. He would smile in acknowledging something pleasant, but generally he seemed to feel despair. His emotions were expressed in terms of stubbornness and obstinacy. If he felt threatened, he became passive and silent, and in this manner opposed anything he did not want to do or say. This was his means of dealing with any authority, whether a teacher in school or a parent. Though he had an above-average intelligence, he was doing poorly in school. There were important things he would not do or forgot to do, and his grades suffered. In talking about his life, Jimmy was vague. He had trouble seeing anything in his life as denied, with any form or shape. One thing in his life was clear. He saw his father as weak and powerless. However much his father threatened, cajoled, or beat him, Jimmy always knew that the man was playing a role. His father was a large man, lighter in color than his son, and grossly overweight. He dressed in rumpled suits, wrinkled shirts, and greasy ties. In some of the early family sessions, he would interrupt to complain of his acquiring manhood, various ailments. He spoke of an ulcer that was always acting up. Mr. B played at being the minister of a storefront church, in addition to his full-time job at the factory. From an early age, Jimmy was aware that his father could never stand up. He had heard his mother say it, and he observed it himself. One of the boy's few delights was in recalling an occasion when his father cringed and sent his wife to the door to handle a bill collector. Many of Jimmy's friends did not have their fathers living at home, but he was certain that those fathers, in the same situation, would have acted the same way. Mrs. B was a short, dark woman with an attractive but worried face. She was neat and XED up, and openly compared her appearance with her husband's usually disheveled state. She did not hide her contempt for him. She constantly undermined his feeble attempts to relate to Jimmy. She was the dominant girl in the house, and she assumed this position as an unwanted burden, as something about which she had no choice. She would alternate between understanding Jimmy and dramatically washing her hands of everything. In terms of individual psychopathology, Jimmy can be matched with thousands of teenage boys of every race and ethnic background. He is responding to his puberty with restlessness and feelings he cannot articulate directly. He is angry with his father and alternately attracted to and repelled by his mother. Every therapist has seen many Jimmys. What is different about him is that he is black and is experiencing what every black boy in this country must undergo. His personality and character structure, his emotional assets and liabilities. 57. Are being shaped as much by his blackness as by his personal environment. Jimmy is beginning to realize that he has no power and, like his father, will not get it. At his age the concepts are misty, but he realizes that his father and the fathers of his friends are lacking something. He has had few, if any, traumatic incidents with whites. There have been no overt acts of discrimination. The family has lived in a ghetto, and all their socialization has been within that framework. But Jimmy is part of a historical legacy that spans more than 300 years. He lives in a large city, but he shares his insight with every black child in every city in this country. He must devise individual ways to meet group problems. He must end decompensations, whether healthy or unhealthy. There must be a tremendous expenditure of psychic energy to cushion the shock of learning that he is denied what other men around him have. When he states his desire to attack a white man, he consciously acknowledges his wish to attack those who keep him powerless. Both theories of personality development and clinical experience attest to the troubled path from childhood to manhood. The young man must have developed any expertise in making his way in a complex and ambiguous social organization. Under the most favorable signs, it is a difficult task, and society must turn its most benign and helping face to the young aspirant. And once the game is mastered, a certain exhibible readiness is required because the rules are constantly being changed. Thus the black boy in growing up encounters some strange impediments. Schools discourage his ambitions. 58. Acquiring manhood. Training for valued skills is not available to him, and when he does triumph in some youthful competition, he receives compromised praise, not the glory he might expect. In time he comes to see that society has locked arms against him, that rather than help he can expect opposition to his development, and that he lives not in growth with hostility. For the black man in this country, it is not so much a matter of acquiring manhood as it is a struggle to feel it his own. Whereas the white man regards his manhood as an ordained right, the black man is engaged in a never-ending battle for its possession. For the black man, attaining any portion of manhood is an active process. He must penetrate barriers and overcome opposition in order to assume a masculine posture. For the inner psychological obstacles to manhood are never so formidable as the impediments woven into American society. By contrast, for a white man in this country, the rudiments of manhood are settled at birth by the possession of a penis and a white skin. This biological affirmation of masculinity and identity as master is enough to ensure that, whatever his individual limitations, this society will not systematically erect obstructions to his achievement. Throughout his life, at each critical point of development, the black boy is told to hold back, to constrict, to subvert and camouflage his normal masculinity. Male assertiveness becomes a forbidden fruit, and if it is attained, it must be savored privately. Manhood must always be denied for the setting in which it occurs. A man in a Siberian village may be very different from a man in a Chicago suburb. Biologically. 59. They share the same drives and limitations, but their societies may decree totally different roles. Manhood in this country has many meanings, but a central theme is clear. Men are very early taught that they have certain prerogatives and privileges. They are encouraged to pursue, to engage life, to attack, rather than to shrink back. They learn early that to express a certain amount of aggression and assertion is manly. Every playground, every schoolyard is LLED with boys acting and attacking, playing at being grown up. The popular heroes in this country are men who express themselves aggressively and assertively. As boys approach adulthood, masculinity becomes more and more bound up with money-making. In a capitalistic society, economic wealth is inextricably interwoven with manhood. Closely allied is power to control and direct other men, power to influence the course of one's own and other lives. The more lives one can influence, the greater the power. The ultimate power is the freedom to understand and alter one's life. It is this power, both individually and collectively, which has been denied the black man. Under slavery, the black man was a psychologically emasculated and totally dependent human being. Times and conditions have changed, but black men continue to exhibit the inhibitions and psychopathology that had their genesis in the slave experience. It would seem that for masculine growth and development the psychological conditions have changed very much. Better jobs are available, housing is improving, and all the external signs of progress can be seen, but the American heritage of racism will still not allow the black man to feel himself 60. Master in his own land. Just as Jimmy is beset by forces larger than his individual experiences, so is the black man in this society, more than other men, shaped by currents more powerful than the course of his own life. There are rules which regulate black lives far more than the lives of white men. The simply view of T.B. Archie is an unfortunate theme repeated too often by scholars who should know better. If a man is stripped of his authority in the home by forces outside that home, the woman naturally must assume the status of head of household. This is the safety factor inherent in a household which includes two adults, and it by no means suggests that the woman prefers it that way. If a woman is widowed, she may assume many masculine functions, but the household may be a patriarchy without a patriarch. In the black household, the man faces greater than usual odds in making his way. The care and rearing of children falls even more heavily on the wife. She is the culture bearer. She interprets the society to the children and takes as her task the shaping of their character to meet the world as she knows it. This is every mother's task. But the black mother has a more ominous message for her child and feels more urgently the need to get the message across. The child must know that the white world is dangerous and that if he does not understand its rules, it may kill him. When black men recall their early life, consistent themes emerge. For example, the mother is generally perceived as having been sharply contradictory. She may have been permissive in some areas and punitive and rigid in others. There are remembrances of stimulation. 61. And gratification coexisting with memories of deprivation and rejection. There is always a feeling that the behavior of the mother was purposeful and deliberate. The black man remembers that his her underwent frequent and rapid shifts of mood. He remembers the cruelty. The mother who sang spirituals gently at church was capable of inflicting senseless pain at home. These themes of gratification and cruelty are consistent enough to suggest that they played a critical role in preparing the boy for adulthood. It would seem that the boy had to experience the polarities of ambivalence so that he could understand his later role in a white society. He must be adequately prepared. The black mother shares a burden with her soul sisters of 3 centuries ago. She must produce and shape and mold a unique type of man. She must intuitively cut and blunt his masculine assertiveness and aggression, lest these put the boy's life in jeopardy. During slavery, the danger was real. A slave boy could not show too much aggression. The feelings of anger and frustration which channeled themselves into aggression had to be thwarted. If they were not, the boy would have little or no use as a slave and would be slain. If any feelings, especially those of assertive manhood, were expressed too strongly, then that slave was a threat, not only to himself and his master but to the entire system as well. For that, he would have to be killed. The black mother continues this heritage from slavery and simultaneously re-ex the world she now knows. Even today, the black man cannot become too aggressive without hazard to himself. To do so is to challenge the delicate balance of a complex social system. 62. Mother, of whatever color and degree of proficiency, knows what the society in which she lives will require of her children. Her basic job is to prepare the child for this. Because of the institutionalization of barriers, the black mother knows even more surely what society requires of her children. What at RST seemed a random of mothering HNSGRA and usually rammed and deliberate, if unconscious, method of preparing a black boy for his subordinate place in the world. As a result, black men develop considerable hostility toward black women as the inhibiting instruments of an oppressive system. The woman has more power, more accessibility into the system, and therefore she is more feared, while at the same time envied. And it is her lot in life to suppress masculine assertiveness in her sons. Mr. R was a writer who presented himself for treatment in his mid-50s. In his younger days he had enjoyed success and a certain amount of adulation in white society. Throughout the course of treatment he presented a picture of culture and refinement. His trouble was that several years earlier he had lost the spark of creativity and his writing ceased. He made frequent resolutions to resume writing, but his motivation never matched his ambition. It developed that he was afraid to compete with white men as a writer. Whatever he wrote, his obsessional fears dictated that somewhere someone who was white had written something better. He was a defeated and despairing man when he entered treatment. He had, however, a delicious secret which he used as comfort when he was most depressed. His face would crease with a smile when he recounted his numerous affairs as a young man. In all his life he never doubted his ability to outperform a white man sexually. He told how he had banged many white women. He sometimes spoke of himself as a deformed man or as a cripple, but sex was the one area in which he felt completely adequate. The mythology and folklore of black people is LLED with tales of sexually prodigious men. Most boys grow up on a steady diet of folk heroes who have distinguished themselves by sexual feats. It is significant that few, if any, of these folk heroes are directing armies or commanding empires. Dreams must in some way reach reality, and in this country the black man, until quite recently, had not been in positions of power. His wielding of power had been in the privacy of the boudoir. To be sure, black men have sexual problems. They may have impotence, premature ejaculation, and the entire range of pathology which limits and distorts sexual life. Such ailments have the same dynamic origins in men of all races. But where sex is employed as armament and used as a conscious and deliberate means of defense, it is the black man who chooses this weapon. If he cannot GHT the white man openly, he can and does battle him secretly. Recurrently, the pattern evolves of black men using sex as a dagger to be symbolically thrust into the white man. A black man who was an orderly in a hospital had an 8th grade education and felt himself inadequate in most endeavors. If called upon to perform a new duty, he would re-ECT for a moment and feel dumbstruck. 1. 64. Evening. An attractive young nurse made seductive overtures to him. At RST he was not convinced that she was serious but thought she was playing a game. When he discovered that she meant it, he took her to bed with a vengeance. During the weekly therapy hour he would elaborate and expand on his feats. One central fact became more and more clear. He was able to state very directly that every time he possessed the girl sexually, he was making up for having sat on the back of the bus and having endured numberless humiliations. He was getting revenge for generations of slavery and degradation. One of the constant themes in black folklore is the bad nigger. It seems that every community has had one or was afraid of having one. They were feared as much by blacks as by whites. In the slave legends there are tales of docile old hands suddenly going berserk. It was a common enough phenomenon to appear in writings of the times and to stimulate the erection of defenses against this violent kind of man. Today black boys are admonished not to be a bad nigger. No description need be offered, every black child knows what is meant. They are angry and hostile. They strike fear into everyone with their uncompromising rejection of restraint or inhibition. They may seem at one moment meek and compromised and in the next a terrifying killer. Because of his experience in this country, every black man harbors a potential bad nigger inside him. He must ignore this inner man. The bad nigger is bad because he has been required to renounce his manhood to save his life. The more one approaches 65. The American ideal of respectability, the more this hostility must be repressed. The bad nigger is a damned nigger, a reminder of what manhood could be. Cultural stereotypes of the savage rapist Negro express the fear that the black man will turn on his tormentors. Negro organizations dread the presence of the bad nigger. Of goods were so high that if one made a purchase he was entering upon years of indebtedness. The carrier held in front of the ghetto laborer is the consumer item, the auto, the TV, and the high set. If the poor black man falls into place in America, he takes whatever job is offered, receives minimal pay, purchases hard goods at harder prices, and teeters from insolvency to bankruptcy in the ghetto. Exhausted, he was offered a stimulant in the form of the civil rights laws. When it became clear that they were nothing more than words from Washington, he kicked over the traces. He took a shortcut. Instead of working for a lifetime to buy a piece of slum property which might fall at any moment and which he would likely never own, Anyway, instead of this treadmill, he burned it down. Instead of working for years to pay 3 times the usual cost of a television set, he broke a window and stole it. Instead of the desperate, frustrating search to find out which white man was friendly and which was hostile, he simply labeled them all the enemy. There never seemed to be a great deal of difference between friends and enemies anyway. So in a spontaneous blast he burned up the ghetto. And the wrong question continued to be asked: why a rim in Detroit, where conditions were so good? The worst slum and the best slum are very close together compared with the distance separating the world of black men and the world of whites. At bottom, America remains a slave country which happens to have removed the slave laws from the books. The question we must ask is, what held the slave rebellion in check for so long? The racist tradition is pervasive and envelopes every American. For black men it constitutes a heavy psychological burden. From the unemployed, illiterate ghetto dweller to the urbanized man living in an integrated setting, careful examination shows psychological scars. Black men GHT one another, do violence to property, do hurtful things to themselves while nursing growing hatred for the system which oppresses and humiliates them. Their manhood is tested daily. As one patient expressed it, the black man in this country GHTs the main event in Madison Square Garden every day. A reactive and cautious man relates some episode of irrational and aggressive behavior. He has spent a lifetime suppressing his feelings, and now he is frightened. 71. And wants reassurance that what has happened will not recur. Another man erupts and attacks a neighbor who knocks on his door. These incidents, like the regular Saturday night brawls that have been characteristic of the black ghetto, are the short bursts of rage which find broader expression in Watts, Newark, and Detroit. Many black men show a curious symptom: weeping without feeling. The tears come without warning and may be quite embarrassing. It is seen frequently in our patient population of black men of above average achievement. We can only speculate on the basis of a small sample, but it would seem that it also occurs, though with less frequency, among black men of lower socioeconomic levels. Clinical experience indicates that the symptom is relatively rare among white men of all classes. A man watching a football game on television sees a Negro star take the ball on a long downfield run, and as he crosses the goal line in triumph, the viewer is aware of tears in his eyes. Another patient recalls attending a civil rights meeting at which Martin Luther King spoke eloquently. He was suddenly aware of tears. Another man attended a business meeting at which a successful white businessman was being extolled, and as the gum of honor's unbroken series of business triumphs was told, the patient found himself wiping away tears. Common to all these incidents is a black man passively viewing another man, black or white, triumphant over odds and standing supreme in a moment of personal glory. Further, the patients were struck by the fact that the tears seemed to come of their own accord, unsummoned and unaccompanied by any emotional feeling or any thought which might cause them to weep. The event was too simple: witnessing another triumphant man, and tears, no feelings, no thoughts. In the course of treatment, attention was focused on the lack of feeling, and the associations which came gradually made it clear that it was important for the viewer not to allow himself feelings. The obvious forbidden feelings were ones of sadness. And for what? For what he might have been. He might have been the victor receiving the roar of the crowd. The tears are for what he might have achieved if he had not been held back. He was held back by some inner command nor to excel, not to achieve, and 0t to become outstanding, not to draw attention to himself. Even at the price of achievement, he felt bound to follow a command to remain anonymous. Once he sees the compelling nature of this inner rule of behavior, he can trace it to his mother. Only she was so concerned with his behavior, and she was most concerned that he be modem and self-effacing. And when he sees that his grief is over lost achievement, relinquished at the behest of his her, he becomes enraged with her. This was the reason he had to suppress all feeling connected with the tears, because it led too directly to his mother as the inhibiting factor in his development. Upon reaching this point, many patients immediately displace the rage onto society, saying they were not in 73. Inhibited early in life by parents, but later, upon encountering a restrictive and inhibiting social system where the cards were stacked against them. With some patients the RST object of their anger was white society and the second the mother, but always the mother was close to the surface. It was her closeness to the symptom which made necessary the inhibition of feeling associated with the tears. Finally, there comes later a deeper understanding of the mother as a concerned mediator between society and the child. The patient comes to recognize that, while the larger society imposes a harsh inhibition on his development and a threat to any aggressivity, this hostility of society is communicated to him by his mother, whose primary concern is that he survive. For if he does not realize that his aggressiveness puts him in grave danger from society generally, he may not survive. With this recognition his hostility toward his mother lessens and his dire cred toward white society. This symptom, seen so frequently, is like an isolated sentinel suggesting deeper layers of interaction between impulse and inhibition, individual drive, and the stone wall of external reality. How much of this NDS its roots in history? How did the mother come to systematically drive out manliness from her sons under the sign of love? And does our patient weep only for himself? We are certain that the answers lie in the past. A schoolteacher married a laborer. They worked hard and with economy and planning managed to acquire a home and a car. Children came as planned, but con-ICT came and grew. The wife wanted a larger home with a yard. The husband resented her demands. He felt that she had no respect for him, that to her he was merely a provider for her endless wishes. She was embarrassed by his poor education. He felt that she and her friends were phony and that she was preoccupied with maintaining senseless appearances. Their mutual hostility led to verbal and later physical assaults. Divorce was the result. This pattern is so common in Negro marriages that it deserves special study, which might shed light on the broader problems of how in America choice of mate and marriage in general is influenced by a person's blackness. 75. There are voluminous studies describing the economic and social function of Negroes and we feel no necessity to duplicate this work. Rather we shall link the psychological functioning of the individual to his role as a discrete citizen, as an American, as a black man, and as a member of a family. All his possible roles are in a vital son, husband, and father. The family 18 the matrix out of which the inner, uniquely individual man grows, it is this which restores him vital information about his world. And later it is the source of comfort which will heal him on his return from the wars it prepared him for. To understand marriage and choice of mate we must understand childhood. Children develop psychologically within the framework supplied by parents and family. For example, if religion occupies a central position in a family, then each child in that family must develop at least partly in response to religion. It must occupy a certain space within his psychological body. He may adopt a pious posture and at least give the appearance of being a devout and faithful believer in the gods of his fathers. Or he may become irreverent and be actively against religion, presenting himself as diametrically opposed to his religious parents. But while differing from them in this important respect he will resemble them in the amount of psychic energy he devotes to religious matters. Or he may ignore religion and to all intents and purposes disengage himself from it altogether. An inspection will reveal, however, that he has displaced his religious concerns onto some seemingly innocuous area where it escapes recognition. He may even have denied himself that displacement, but in his silence one will sense a signing. 76. Mam CZGE and love. Can't silent area of his psychic life. There will seem to be a vacuum, a hole, and one later may wonder what had been there. We want to show that issues which were important in childhood, and important to people who in turn were important to the child, must of necessity show themselves as issues which must be taken into account in the child's later adult life. A minor point may be illustrative. The racial mixture in the background of black people is so varied that it is extremely rare to find two Negroes who have exactly the same brown tones to their skin. There is usually a bit more yellow or red or black that distinguishes seemingly identical skin colors from one another. But these are minor variations on a brown theme, and their least deviations are generally of small moment to adults. The infant's world is so very different in this regard. His mother's body is a vitally important part of his world. Her breasts, her hands, arms, face, are the most important things he sees and touches. She is the RST human he recognizes, and for a long time in his small life she is the bringer of life. As he plays with her breast or face, he looks intently, with the myopic vision of a child, at her skin. Its color becomes to him the color of all loving people's skin, and in fact the particular skin tones he sees as a child will ever after evoke emotional overtones based on that intimacy. It is no wonder then that men choose women whose skin tones are closely matched to their mothers, or that in multiple marriages all the wives will have the identical color. 77. A woman so fair that one had to take her word for it that she was Negro chose a series of deep black lovers. She clearly seemed RST attracted by their color, and, although she gave any number of reasons for her choices, there seemed a deeper cause. A dream reminded her of a deep black relative, a gentle kindly man with whom she had no kin, but who had befriended her as a fatherless child and toward whom she ever after maintained a deep attachment. As a matter of fact, tracing this relationship brought her to question her conviction that she was Negro. There was no proof, but there was much to suggest that she was actually a white girl who had been adopted by Negro foster parents, and that her natural father had not been a black man as she had grown up believing. Very possibly, her attachment to the dark man not only had determined the color of her lovers but had in fact determined the racial identity she later assumed. Thus, with women as well, the color of the father or father surrogate may be so intimately linked with the positive aspects of their attachment to him as to determine the color of all future lovers. At times, the theme "black is the color of my true love's skin" might become the credo of several generations of a family. A fair-skinned girl was the RST child of a black mother. The father was white. The parents did not marry, however, and the black mother subsequently married a black man. The dark-skinned children who followed made the fair child's life miserable with taunts about her yellowness. She came to hate her color and indeed to dislike all fair-skinned people. She married a very dark man and warned her daughters that fair-skinned men were deceptive. 78. Marriage and love. And not to be trusted. They, in turn, married dark men. And though it is not known what message they conveyed to their daughters, the daughters also chose dark husbands. Color may be significant for one's own deep emotional responses, or may come to symbolize virtue or per dy, but by far the most universal significance color has had among black Americans has been as a symbol of status. If you're white, you're right. If you're brown, hang around. If you're black, get back. Sadly, even now there is too much truth in this doggerel. Mothers have wanted fair girls for their sons and fair husbands for their daughters. Until very recent times, beauty among Negro girls has been synonymous with fair skin and a minimum of Negroid features. A good-looking Negro man has traditionally been a fair-skinned or light brown man. The issue has been of less importance to men, since male beauty is of less significance in this country. It has played a part, however, in opportunities available for masculine achievement. In many vocational and academic settings, opportunities have come more rapidly for the Negro with a lighter hue and straighter hair. Thus those Negro families which have placed such a premium on light color have had some meager reality to justify their attitude. We should emphasize the meagerness of the justification, however, for the preponderant sources of their desperate dread of blackness have been their own unreasoning self-hatred and their pitiful wish to be white. Such families can often trace their origins. 79. Back to a slave owner who gave land to his children by black mothers, or who allowed these children to obtain an education that provided them with economic advantages. As a result, The fair-skinned aristocracy among Negroes are families with money, position, and immense advantages counterbalanced by the terrible burden of a self-hatred so powerful that they can exercise the greatest cruelties on people who remind them that they too are black. Such families are becoming anomalous and, more important, they are becoming irrelevant. The grand encounter with which this nation is occupied is between the black masses and the white power holders. Fair-skinned dilettantes have earned little consideration. But permeating the thinking of all Negroes remains the connection between status and beauty and fair skin. If she were typical, the schoolteacher with whose story this chapter opened is probably fairer than her husband, and in fact most Negro couples are likely to show this color d'errance. The man pursues the woman, the beauty, and the frequency with which Negro men choose women fairer than they attests at least in part to the connection in the mind of the black man between fair skin and beauty. If in affairs of love women were the aggressors, the color relationship might be reversed. These are some of the additional considerations that enter into a relationship between a black man and a black woman. Their love and their union produce a family, a new entity. Central to the new union is their adulthood. A marriage signee is the maturity of the partners and, importantly as well, their autonomy. Small wonder. 80. Marriage and love. That young black married couples are likely to guard their dignity. Honor becomes more important and humiliation more unbearable, not only because the people are young and new at marriage but because it is precisely the perquisites of maturity that are so mindlessly made difficult for black people to enjoy. In such a cruel way it is necessary for each young black man to endy his own variety of manhood with which he can live and which sighs not jeopardize his own safety or that of his now extended self, his wife, and children. And the woman must endy a way for a outing of her womanhood which complements her mate and at the same time can bloom in spite of the economic burden she must bear and in such a way that it does not spur her mate to challenges which jeopardize the family. The tragedy and complexity of the situation become more apparent when we remember that a family is a functional unit designed for one primary purpose, the protection of the young, and while it serves other vital social purposes, none is more important than the function of protection. But the black family cannot protect its members. Nowhere in the United States can the black family extend an umbrella of protection over its members in the way that a white family can. In every part of the nation its members are subjected to physical and verbal abuse, humiliation, unlawful search and seizure, and harassment by authorities. Its members are jailed, beaten, robbed, killed, and raped, and exposed to this kind of jeopardy to a degree unheard of in white families. Thus the black family is prevented from performing its most essential function, its mix and protection of its members. 81. Marriage among slaves was a farce, but not because of their low station or ignorance of the ways of the nation. It was so because there could be no marriage where the nation moved monolithically and institutionally to keep all slaves exposed to capricious punishment, and when by law no man in the nation could protect a slave, least of all the members of his family. By law no slave husband could protect his wife from physical or sexual abuse at the hands of a white man. By law no slave mother could protect her child against physical or sexual abuse at the hands of a white man. These were the reasons why marriage among slaves was meaningless. There could be no functioning family. All black families in the United States face the task of establishing a family in a nation that is institutionally opposed to this fundamental function of the family. Black husbands cannot provide their wives with as much protection as can white husbands. This can be seen with great clarity in many parts of the South and as one observes the relationship between blacks and policemen in any part of the country. Mothers cannot protect their children from exposure to criminal elements in their neighborhoods because white law enforcement authorities show little enthusiasm and even less capability for the suppression of crime in Negro neighborhoods. Their actions accentuate the attitude they often express: Negro neighborhoods produce a superabundance of crime, so why should the residents object? When white mothers seek to improve the environment in which their children grow up, they envy a more responsive and helpful police department. Black parents have faced a virtual stonewall as they have tried to improve the educational experience of their children. In spite of heavy taxes, often paid many times over, These parents are in the main unable to bring about improvement in the quality of the education their children receive. White parents have generally found a more responsive board of education, and in fact the quality of instruction available to white children in this country is significantly higher than that available to black children. Black parents are forced to pay fantastic amounts of money for decent housing and are barred by law and custom from decent housing at a decent price. And the black parents are absolutely helpless in the face of this collusion among real estate men, landlords, and the courts of law. When a black child notices that a white man with the same job as his father can provide good housing for his family while his father provides him with a slum, that child may draw conclusions about his father's ability to look after his own. But the father may not be incompetent at all, it may simply be that he lives in a smooth-running community where black folk are being contained and are helpless. The Negro family is in deep trouble. It is coming apart and it is failing to provide the nurturing that black children need. In its failure, the resulting isolated men and women fail generally to make a whole life for themselves in a nation designed for families and for white families besides. A great many of the problems of black people in America can be traced back to the widespread crumbling of the family structure. But in spite of the many simplistic half-truths that have been uttered, as in Daniel P. Moynihan's celebrated 83 report on the Negro family, the cause of the sickness in black families is not primarily the attack on manhood that discrimination relentlessly carries out. Men have borne that and remained men. It is not urbanization and the demand that the family adjust itself to a new world. Families have done that successfully since the beginning of time. No, could it be poverty alone, if men were allowed the rights and privileges, the opportunities and assistance which citizens of any nation call their due? No. 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 The problem of the Negro family is not these challenges. The problem is a latter-day version of the problem faced by the slave family. How does one build a family, make it strong, and breed from it strong men and women when the institutional structures of the nation make it impossible for the family to serve its primary purpose, the protection of its members? The Negro family is weak and relatively ineffective because the United States sets its hand against black people and by the strength of wealth, size, and number prevent black families from protecting their members. Moynihan's argument seemed to have been developed in reverse. Starting with the task of providing a sociological basis in theory for a federal program of jobs for Negroes, he was obviously limited to a few concepts which would support his argument. A program for strengthening black families would have to include a change in the fabric of the nation so that a black man could extend physical protection to his family everywhere, throughout the country. Such a program would include a change in the working of governments so that black people could command that of jails serve them, not humiliate them, that policemen protect. 84. Marriage and love them, not pray on them. Such a program would see to it that officialdom generally and courts of law in particular occupy themselves with grander matters than keeping black families huddled together in a ghetto for the enrichment of real estate interests. If to these changes in national life is added a program of jobs for Negroes, then we would agree that substantive aid will have been given the ailing black family. But in spite of the problems facing them, black couples continue to marry, establish families, and try to make a worthwhile contribution to the stream of life. The husband works as best he can, the wife mothers as best she can, and they love each other as best they can. As they mold their lives together and form a matrix from which children grow, the next most important function of a family, second only to protection and survival, comes into focus, to provide an accurate interpretation of the world to its children. Children must above all be taught what the world is like, how it functions, and how they must function if they are to survive and eventually establish their own families. If the family does not convey an accurate image of the world, the children will either succumb or fail to prosper sufficiently to allow them to start their own families. So important is this interpretive function that the natural relationship between children and parents makes it certain that the children will see the world through the eyes of their parents. The intimacy, the love, and above all the identification with the parents, not to mention the absence of competing models, all make certain that the child will view the world with the eyes of the parents. 85. Is it not conceivable that many of the dismal consequences of Negro family life might be related to the world the children view? The family, we can be certain, has given them an accurate view of the world. If this view is bleak and dismaying, may not the family say to its young, "It is a terrible place you come to. I'm not sure I can hearten you in any way. Although I would like to. I can only say I have survived. I honestly don't know how. And you must also survive." If such a message is indeed conveyed by black families, and surely it must be, then this may account for the fragmenting of the family structure. The family is in fact saying that it has no skills of mastery to pass on, that it has found no way to reliably make it in society. It says that one must GHT to live, one can only survive, and 1772T survive. This would seem quite enough to shake any young Generatlon. But families continue to form, to function, and to grow old. The bond which makes it all possible is that between men and women. It is the bedrock, the solace which makes so many darknesses bearable. And even here, in the love relation which makes the family possible, we end the contaminating onions of racial hatred. A black couple, describing their love-making, said that much of the bantering between them involved invidious comparisons between the wife's sexual desirability and that of any hypothetical white woman. The joking would extend to the idea that white people generally are more attractive, more rened, more natural objects of desire, whereas blacks are deformed, repugnant, and debased. In this polarization of black and white, they would become aroused by the fantasy which made them animal-like, and the ensuing sexual experience would be enhanced. It should be no surprise to ND racial issues accompanying a black man to bed. The black man occupies a very special sexual role in American society. He is seen as the ultimate in virility and masculine vigor. But at the same time he is regarded as socially, economically, and politically castrated, and he is gravely handicapped in performing every other masculine role. It is difficult for him to acquire goods for his family, to achieve power in the councils of his fellow men, and, in fact, to fulfill the fundamental role of providing protection for his family. His society has barred him from white women. However much love and passion he feels for his black partner, he cannot help bringing the idea to his bed that only here, and only with her, is he granted the opportunity to function in a truly manly way. Such attitudes carry with them feelings of rage, depression, futility, and, not unexpectedly, sometimes a heightening of sexual excitement. However much he may love his partner, he cannot help seeing, reacted in her, the narrowed range of his own world. She is his black counterpart and is depreciated as much as he. The natural male inclination to obtain and possess a highly valued woman, to compete with other men for her favor, and to win out because of his own strength, none of this does he fulfill with his beloved. He sees her as a 87. Depreciated object, and this reinforces his own perception of himself as a depreciated man. The enhancement of the sexual act which comes to the male who feels he has laid hold of a prize is absent. Moreover, his depreciation of her and his hostility toward her cannot help being perceived by the woman, and likewise cannot but contribute to her own feeling of degradation. As mentioned previously, a device may be brought into play which seems an ingenious solution to an otherwise impossible psychological impasse. Because in this society our defenses are set RMLY in opposition to sexual impulses, such impulses are experienced as degrading aspects of ourselves, and the full drive and power of human sexuality is linked to a feeling of debasement. Thus, insofar as the black man sees himself as a cornered, debased, and castrated sexual object, this very perception of himself allows him to circumvent the inhibition of sexual desire. In his degradation he lays hold of a fuller range of sexual powers. It is as if he says, "If I am an animal, then let me show you how this animal makes love." With this enhancement of his sexual powers his self-esteem rises. Out of his feelings of devaluation come an increase in his feelings as a man and, no doubt, a strengthening of his resolution to enter again into outside competition, that competition which in every other way is so heavily weighted against him. It is in the nature of women to experience sex as an interplay between narcissism and masochism. As the black woman enters the embrace of her black lover, many of the same ghosts which haunt him now also haunt her, but in a characteristically feminine way. All her life her narcissism has been deeply wounded and impaired. She finds it difficult to experience herself as a highly valued object to whom any man would be drawn. Rather she sees herself as a depreciated, unwanted instrument of no inherent value, to be used by men and society at their pleasure. The bitterness that grows out of such a self-perception augments her already established self-hatred, her feelings of being used, and her feelings of worthlessness. Under the circumstances she feels hatred and scorn for the man who embraces her, since she sees in him the evidence of her own degradation. Where a woman would otherwise end narcissistic enhancement in being possessed by a powerful lover, she cannot regard the man as either powerful or loving. Instead of narcissistic enhancement, she experiences narcissistic depletion. She hates him for his being castrated in society at large and unable to bring that special increment of power to their loving. She finds herself progressively degraded in the course of the sexual relationship. But again, as happens to her lover, she finds her own erotic feelings strengthened by the feelings of degradation. In the feminine sexual mode these feelings of masochism have a strong erotic component, so that she finds herself not only degraded but masochistically submitting to a man. She views as depreciated and participating in an act which further depletes her slender narcissistic resources. She finds a sexual reinforcement and strengthening which brings a heightening of erotic pleasure out of the very circumstances which might have initially blunted it. While this phenomenon of degradation and masochistic submission ultimately serves to strengthen the sexual experience, beyond the world of the black woman it is in 89. Large measure a commentary upon the repressive attitudes generally held towards sexual functioning in the Western world. It speaks as much for the adaptability of the human organism as for man's apparently innate ability to make life difficult for himself. Sexual union, then, requires a synthesis of real life and contact in a wave that will make for a vigorous coming together. The fact that their real life is often an oppressed life can impose an additional psychological burden on the black lovers, which serves as a divisive element in the black family and in a significant way contributes to the fragility of that union. Black men and women have this complex of problems in large measure because they have always been regarded by white Americans as sexual objects, exotic people living close to instinct and primitivism. The fascination black people have for white people in the sexual area can hardly be exaggerated, and this factor alone makes a major contribution to the charged quality of racial relationships in this country. One result of this sexual tension between the races is a preoccupation with interracial sexual liaisons. The black lover fears that his partner will be tempted by a white seducer. And conversely, his white counterparts feel impotent if challenged by a black rival. One could make a case for mutual lust and jealousy as the basis for racial conflict in America. But since interracial sexual unions have so infatuated Americans, black and white, and form so large a part of their secret fantasies, some study of these relationships is in order. When a black man and a white woman unite, one can assume that unnumbered racially connected issues will arise. For the black man, the white woman represents the socially identified female ideal and thus an intensely exciting object for his sexual possession. She has been identified as precisely the individual to whom access is barred by every social institution. The forbiddenness and desire of his projected Oedipal fantasies. He sees himself as nally possessing the maternal object under circumstances which reproduce the dangerous, and quality of Oedipal interest as experienced by the child. He feels a sense of power at having acquired this highly valuable woman and a sense of power that she finds him desirable and indeed that she finds him more desirable than a white lover. But at the same time he perceives her as white and as a representative of all the white oppressors who have made his life so wretched. In a sense then, she becomes the target for a hatred which far transcends the encounter between this man and this woman. The sexual act itself carries aggressive overtones, and in the fantasy of all men there is a likening of male aggression in the sexual act to murderous aggression and a likening of the female partner to the victim of murder. The black man then has an opportunity to live out murderous fantasies of revenge. In possessing the white woman he sees himself as degrading her, in this instance sharing the community's feeling that a white woman who submits to a black lover becomes as debased as he. In this way he may feel the great cation of turning the tables on his white oppressor and thus becoming the instrument through which a white person is degraded. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, he sees himself as having vanquished the white man in the eld of love and of having rendered him impotent and castrated, for the white woman, in fantasy at least, has embraced a white lover and then chosen a black one. While in every other area of life the black man may feel emasculated. Roles and, because of the central importance of the sexual function in human affairs, may feel that the scales are almost balanced. His fantasies and reinforcement in the keen delight his partner takes in his embrace. Her delight may rest on her own set of fantasies, but they both know that, whatever the causes may be, she nds more intense great cation from her black lover than she does from her white one. Should the relationship progress to marriage, the problems increase exponentially, since in this culture marriage progressively downgrades the importance of the sexual act and lays increasing emphasis on the economic and social functioning of the partners. The black man married to a white woman is hounded by the knowledge that outside the bedroom his manhood is compromised. In fact, both the initial delight of his partner and his own intense satisfaction may pall under the certain knowledge that in the outside world he is an emasculated half-man. This places a grave strain on the relationship. The greatest stress seems to come, however, from the perception by the partners of the nature of the world in which they live, a perception which is sufficiently tied to reality to change in response to a change in that external world. The evidence for this is seen in the happy marriages between blacks. 92. Marriage and love. And whites which arish outside this country and which emphasize that the love relationship, given half a chance by society, can arish between people of disparate origins. The white woman who seeks a black lover nds him to be an intensely exciting sexual partner because of his forbiddenness because oifut, is with whicu she can project onto him her own Oedipal fantasies. Since black people are a minority, representing less than 1/10 of the population, they may not nd the physical appearance of the Caucasian so exotic. This is not true for the Caucasian. A white woman nds her black lover sufficiently strange, and she is able to experience the excitement of having a forbidden sexual object as well as a lover who is so different looking as to allow her to see him as a different kind of human being or even a subhuman animal. She is thus able to experience herself as different or subhuman along with her partner and in that way to participate in sexuality of an intensity and quality forbidden her as herself, with all of the strictures and inhibitions that go along with that self-perception. Though she may view her black lover as a degraded object, she also views him as a sexual master. As she submits to him, her own masochistic strivings feed her excitement at being possessed by such a being. These feelings contribute in a major way to her great cation. In his arms she merges with him and abandons her previous identity. In so doing she nds it easy to isolate the experience as a unique, intensely gratifying moment which has no relationship to the rest of her life. The emasculation of her black lover in the outside world. 93. Makes it easier for her to feel separated and different from him and, in fact, safe from the invasion of her own forbidden fantasies into everyday life. In fact, her attraction to him may rest in large measure specifically on these grounds. The relationship allows her uninhibited enjoyment of otherwise forbidden sexual impulses without experiencing any threat to her life generally. Should such a union eventuate in marriage, she would likely be concerned primarily with his ability to bring home the bacon, and if she found him lacking in this respect, her resulting bitterness might well cause her latent hostility toward all black people to emerge. If, on the other hand, she experienced no disadvantages economically. Her primary concern would surely focus on the social problems they met as a couple. The contempt she would encounter from the majority of white people would be a constant burden, and the contempt she would feel when they saw her with her brown children would cause even greater pain. A white woman had enjoyed a happy marriage to a black man for 6 years. During this time she rarely saw her mother. But when her mother became seriously ill, she sat by her bedside and promised God that if her mother survived she would never again cause her pain. Her mother recovered and the patient developed severe anxiety, phobias, and in fact a pan-neurosis. She became hypersensitive to the states of white people when she appeared in public with her brown children. She refused to go out in public with her husband and discouraged physical intimacy. At the same time she sought to re-establish a close relationship with her mother. 94. Measures age and love. What had been to all appearances a happy marriage dissolved as this woman required a great sacrifice of herself. She had to undo the greatest pain she had caused her mother, marriage to a black man. The white woman who is married to a black man considers her children, the contempt in which they may be held, and the difficulties they may encounter as a result of mixed parentage. Her misery will subside only when they are married and she no longer suffers with them for every rebuff they receive. The relationship which has the longest history and the most complex psychological structure is the relationship between the white man and the black woman. From the very introduction of black slaves into America, black women have been used sexually by their white owners. In contrast to the male slaves, they had a threefold use. Their labor was economically valuable, their bodies had a marketable value as sexual objects, and their potential as breeders of additional slaves was also a source of wealth to their owners. Even now in many areas a black woman has no protection from the sexual appetites of white men. In the raw circumstance of power and the imposition of the will of the powerful on the weak, the most significant aspect of the woman's position is her helplessness against sexual assault. She cannot protect herself against sexual use by a powerful male. Her only protection lies in binding herself sexually to a powerful man who can in turn protect her from other men. It would seem that 95. The erotic component of a woman's masochism and her tendency to gain narcissistic gratification from being chosen by a powerful man make it easy for her to yield herself to a powerful man and to gain special gratification out of such submission. In addition, a woman need feel no qualms of conscience if she is taken sexually against her will and must submit to the sexual act under pain of violence. Under such circumstances her own conscience, moral code, and inhibitions stand in suspension. All these factors are important in the manner in which a black woman relates herself to a white lover. However weak in fact he may be, however ineffective and poor, he is potentially more powerful than any black lover. He is a part of and a representative of the powerful white majority, a representative of the wealth and prestige accrued in the United States and throughout the Western world over the past 2,000 years. In a historical sense, she, on the other hand, stands in the position of all the black people who have been exploited and dominated by white men since the beginning of recorded time. In a historical sense and in a very real contemporary sense, she faces a powerful lover. The prospect of sexually submitting to him evokes excitement in her. In addition to the explicit pleasure involved in masochistic submission, she gains some of the strength and power of the white man. An attractive black wife and mother sought out a highly recommended white professional man and in his consultation room began describing in a very business-like manner the relevant issues which had brought her to his. 96. Marriage and Love. Of C.E. After listening to her why he got up from his desk, came around, kissed her, took off her C-10s, and made love to her. He then told her he would look after her problems and dismissed her. What is of special interest here is the frame of mind of the woman, during the episode in the White Professionals of C.E. In treatment later she recounted that she had been chaste as a single woman and faithful as a wife but found herself strangely submissive and yielding to this man. In fact she was intensely aroused by the experience. Her associations were of his impressive of C.E., his wide reputation, his apparent wealth and power. While there were other determinants to her behavior, the relation of her passivity to his power and the aggressive manner in which he thrust himself on her are instructive. This type of passive submission, strongly colored by eroticism, has historically characterized the relationship between black women and white men. It is the converse of the relationship between black men and white women. The black man is highly excited by possessing the valuable ideal female, and the black woman is intensely aroused at being subdued and possessed by the powerful white man. His power, desirability, and forbiddenness evoke her own Oedipal fantasies, and she nds herself particularly great-eyed that this powerful man chooses her in preference to a white woman. In her relationship with a white man, the black woman can partake of his power and masculinity and can for once free herself of her degraded self-perception. In his 97 embrace, she is whole again and can experience the sexual act as simply a woman submitting to a desirable man. Her own thwarted narcissistic strivings can for once end embodiment in a lover whose possibilities for living them out are apparently limitless, an experience she cannot have with a black lover. To the extent that she sees her own blackness as ugly and repellent, her possession of a white lover and her identication with him allow her to view herself as white and therefore beautiful. The problem arises, however, when she must leave his bed and face the real world again. However much her white lover protests his devotion to her, she is beset with feelings of self-depreciation, depression, and futility. She sees herself as having been used and debased for the satisfaction of a powerful man who only took advantage of her weakness and susceptibility. She perceives herself as having striven for something beyond her, and her remorse is her punishment for reaching above her station. Should she return to a black lover, she might well feel herself all the more degraded and oppressed. If her relationship with the white man leads to marriage, the prospect is that as the bloom of romance fades she will end herself dreading that he will abandon her. Past experiences make her feel truly worthless and undesirable. It is only in his arms that she feels a whole woman, sexually desirable to men. Away from him she is again potentially the ugly, despised black woman. She is convinced that he has a false perception of her which makes her seem beautiful and desirable to him, and she dreads the moment when he sees her as she sees herself. 98. Marriage and love. And, in revulsion, thrusts her away from him. Her position is a wretched one. On the other side of the coin, the white man, by taking to himself a black woman, acts against of all socially accepted norms. Our society allows a white man to surreptitiously experiment with black women sexually but never to take one into a love relationship. As a prostitute or as a casual mistress, a black woman can be a meaningless sexual toy, and involvement with her need have no profound effect on his life. Psychologically, he can look upon her as a debased human animal who nds pleasure in a sexual life no decent woman would tolerate. The uninhibited pleasures he shares with her might serve to further dichotomize his emotional life, and his relationship with his white wife might suffer. But beyond this there need be no grave disruption of his functioning. If, on the other hand, the black woman assumes some emotional importance for him, his problems are compounded. It is likely that he would enter into a relationship only in response to feelings of defiance toward the social order generally, and perhaps his family or parents specifically. Under these circumstances the black woman serves a specific psychological purpose for him because of her general unacceptability as a mate. Whatever great ication the two of them might share in their union, her role as evidence of his defiance and her functioning as a social curiosity will clearly limit the richness of their relationship and dull their satisfaction. In any event, in the United States, the psychological truth is that when a white man chooses a black woman, both in his own eyes and in the eyes of his confreres, he 99. Has chosen a depreciated sexual object rather than a highly valued one. This factor is obviously of greater social importance than the desirability of the black woman as an ascetic and forbidden representative of his inner desires. Such fantasies and strivings allow him to act out unconscious wishes which intensify his pleasure. Their roles, making him the highly valued object whom the woman has been fortunate enough to obtain. his own narcissism is enhanced thereby and he nds a special grati cation in their relationship. He feels constantly inferior to black men, however, feeling that sexually he is less satisfying as a partner than any black man. He is the victim of the stereotype which played such an important part in his choosing a black woman in the RST place. If their relationship develops into marriage, his fantasies inevitably lead him into doubts about his wife's delighting. It is easy for him to become dissatisfied with her and feel the lack of a degime woman whose desirability would enhance his own self-esteem. His role as the more desirable of the pair fades in importance. Again, the evidence is clear that however much misery the black woman and white man experience in their relationship, their suffering is remarkably alleviated by living in a community which does not contain the intense social hostility of communities in the United States. If they moved to Europe or Latin America, they would have a better chance of operating in terms of their individual compatibility, much as any other couple, and of ending fulfillment in their union without special reference to their racial difference. The factor which militates heavily against such unions is the society rather than the racial origins of the pair. However troubled his mating and however fragile his union with his woman, the black man has found sufficient nourishment to endure and bring forth issue, to exploit his strengths, and to relentlessly attack the social order. Traits of character and patterns of behavior that appear more often in black people than in other groups can all be traced to various aspects of life in America. Cultural anthropologists have searched intensively and interminably and have found no contemporary evidence for the persistence of African patterns of culture. The experience of slavery was unbelievably efficient in effacing the African and producing the American Negro. As a result, the cultural and characterological patterns developed by American Negroes provide a unique picture of a people whose history was destroyed and who were offered in its stead a narrow ledge of toil on which to live and grow and nurture children. All that is uniquely Negro found its origin on these shores and provides a living document of black history in America. The interaction among members in black families is increasingly responding to many of the pressures which shape life in other ethnic groups in America. The superficial aspects are the most readily affected, in part because deeper themes and roles are more resistant to change and because the instruments of change are aimed precisely at the superficial aspects of life. But beneath the apparent similarities there run consistent threads, ways of life shared by most black people. The black family is RST of all an extended family. Relatives more readily share the responsibilities of child rearing. Members of the family more often come to the aid of a troubled member. In a child guidance clinic which served a large number of black children, it was found easy to take a black child out of an explosive home situation and lodge him temporarily with a relative in the South. This generally produced good long-term results. Among whites, relatives and 196 pounds immediate family were more resistant to such solutions. When a brother is asked where home is, he is likely to answer promptly, Montgomery, Alabama, even if he has lived in Cleveland, Ohio, for the past 47 years. Home is where the land was and where one's people are. The answer might be further reneged with the explanation, Montgomery is my home but all my people are in Birmingham. Where my people are is part of my essential self and where I dug my engers. 103. In soil is a vital part of me. Geography is thus part of the extended identity as is the extended family. It has a further implication. Away from one's home and people, one is merely a sojourner. However long one lives away from home, the roots reach back to one's people. Cleveland may represent merely a 47-year visit away from home. When death comes, the body is taken home. Thus our Burher is never in a true sense a Clevelander. However much his community makes him feel an outsider, he himself provides an additional increment of alienation. As a protective device, he says it was never his city anyway. The viciousness of life in America for black men makes them remove themselves even further. If I establish that I am a stranger in your land, I will at least avoid the shock of being attacked in my own home by kinfolk. We are strangers and I dwell for a while in your world, therefore, Whatever you do to me cannot truly come as a surprise. In this world of strangers, black men make a home wherever they can. Any black man in a white environment can establish a relationship with another black man by a glance or an easy salutation such as "Hey, bro," and he has a colleague. In years gone by, a most delightful relationship existed between porters and waiters on passenger trains and the infrequent black traveler. A man could put his child on the train, press $1 into the hand of the porter, and ask him to look after her, and he could rest easy. It was a source of pride for train employees to lavish care and affection on their brethren. The charm of a dining car waiter in caring for a frightened black girl would 104 have to be seen to be appreciated. It was as if these men were thumbing their noses at the railroad company as they provided $1,000,000 service to impoverished black travelers. This small body of true aristocrats has lately fallen on hard times, but some future complex of services will no doubt end dark men extending a special hand of welcome to dark brothers. More than any other place, however, the barbershop is the black man's way station, point of contact, and universal home. Here he always ends a welcome, a friendly audience as he tells his story, and a native to give him the word on local doings. The bickering, the sniping, the backbiting so often said to characterize black people in their relationship with one another seems so very much to be the rivalry of siblings. Underlying it all is a feeling that you're no better than I. It is an unfortunate corollary of such a feeling of sibship, but it is probably a small price to pay for the comfort and the web of support provided by a brotherhood. The family is broad, the self has roots in many places. The brother has several selves and many homes. A creature of prey must have more than one haven. It's a poor rat that don't have but one hole. 2. A black mechanic who had a good income as owner of his own repair shop dissipated his proteas, and when pressed by creditors ran crap games in his place of business to raise 105 money. Reminded that he had a major investment in his business which was jeopardized by the gambling, he threw up his hands and said, "I'll never make nothing number 9, way." He was an excellent mechanic and had demonstrated above average ability from his earliest years. He was raised in the South and at the age of 10 was maintaining complicated machinery. With little formal schooling, he nevertheless became skillful at various machine operations. He had developed a potentially thriving business single-handedly. But what he later described so eloquently was his lack of faith in that which be accomplished with his own hands. The ownership of property had been a source of misery for his father. White rivals, with the collusion of Southern courts, had overnight taken the fruits of years of labor. He himself as a young man had been swindled by white men. The crucial factor here is that he had no recourse. The courts, the state, the citizenry all were poised to accuse. More interesting in its long-range prospects has been the apparent eagerness to draft black men for military service. If in fact this is a deliberate design to place black men in uniform in order to get them off the street, it may be the most curious instant cure for a serious disease this nation 211 has yet attempted. Young black men are learning the most modern techniques for killing, techniques which may be used against any enemy. But it is all speculation. The issue now rests with the black masses. When the servile men and women stand up, we had all better duck. We should ask what is likely to galvanize the masses into aggression against the whites. Will it be some grotesque atrocity against black people which at last causes 1/10 of the nation to rise up in indignation and crush the monstrosity? Will it be the example of black people outside the United States who have gained dignity through their own liberation movement? Will it be by the heroic action of a small group of blacks which by its wisdom and courage commands action in a way that cannot be denied? Or will it be by blacks, nally, and in an unpredictable way, simply getting fed up with the bumbling stupid racism of this country? Fired not so much by any one incident as by the gradual accretion of stupidity into steers of national policy. All are possible, or any one, or something yet unthought. It seems certain only that on the course the nation now is headed it will happen. One might consider the possibility that, if the national direction remains unchanged, such a conflagration simply might not come about. Might not black people remain where they are, as they did for 100 years during slavery? Such seems truly inconceivable. Not because blacks are so naturally warlike or rebellious, but because they are led with such grief, such sorrow, such bitterness, and such hatred. It seems now delicately poised, not yet risen to the ash point, but rising rapidly nonetheless. No matter what repressive measures are invoked against the blacks, they will never swallow their rage and go back to blind hopelessness. If existing oppressions and humiliating disenfranchisements are to be lifted, they will have to be lifted most speedily, or catastrophe will follow. For there are no more psychological tricks blacks can play upon themselves to make it possible to exist in dreadful circumstances. No more lies can they tell themselves. No more dreams to X on. No more opiates to dull the pain. No more patience. No more thought. No more reason. Only a welling tide risen out of all those terrible years of grief, now a tidal wave of fury and rage, and all black, black as night. 213.